You are listening to Venture Beyond, Stories from Hidden Worlds. If you enjoy this episode, please leave a like down below and share with a friend. And, if you haven't already, subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode or new series and updates. Welcome to a remastered collection of Avalon Academy. This is part 1 of the series. Introductions. A fully re-recorded, edited, and revised version of Avalon Academy is on the way, with new stories, and even better versions of the stories you know. More news to come on that soon. For now, enjoy this collection of part 1 of Avalon Academy. Number 1. Outsider. Abigail. Abby peeked around the corner of the old Grayson Mill building just outside of the city. 2 figures, a young man and a young woman, stood in front of a doorway that stood alone from the rubble that surrounded it. They were chatting excitedly, though she couldn't quite hear what they were saying. The 2 were strangely dressed, especially for this end of town. The girl wore a yellow silk robe, or coat, with intricate embroidery over a fine white blouse and a brown vest and skirt. When the girl had passed Abby before, she could make out some strange, unrecognizable markings along the hemline. The boy, who seemed a bit younger, had a similar royal blue silk coat, but with trousers instead of a skirt. Take away the silk coat and perhaps they might look somewhat normal, if a bit finely dressed for such a dilapidated area. But add the coat, she'd never seen anyone dressed in such a way. Abby just had to know what they were up to. Of course, perhaps the most puzzling thing is that no one else seemed to share her curiosity. Even Carl the Knife left them alone. Fine clothes like that were just asking to be robbed by any number of desperate dregs in this town. Yet these 2 walked right past without a care in the world for the past week, and no one but her even lifted an eyebrow. The girl took out a long, thin metal rod from her purse, showing it off to the boy, who marveled at it. The girl smirked and shrugged, obviously trying to play as if it were nothing so grand. But Abby could see from even as far away as she was that how the girl smiled and held the rod told how she really felt. This was something precious. The boy's reaction was more than enough to confirm that. Suddenly, they drew out their pocket watches, gold casings glinting in the slowly growing sunlight from above, and the 2 locked eyes. The boy reached into his pockets and pulled out something. Then he turned to the door, opened it, and the 2 walked through. The door closed briskly behind them. Abby cautiously stepped over to the door from her hiding place, like some kind of forlorn monument to what she heard used to be the office building that used to stand there. The door stood alone. She looked behind the door and saw only rubble, dust, and the occasional patch of moss. The pair were nowhere to be seen. She grinned. They had been going somewhere, just like she thought. The real question was where. She placed her hand on the old doorknob and tried to turn it. However, the knob was stuck fast and wouldn't budge. Abby looked over the door closely. There was a keyhole in the knob. Perhaps that was what the young man had taken out of his pocket. A key. She crouched down so that the doorknob was level with her eyes and considered it for a moment. Something told her that even if she could pick the lock, it wouldn't make a difference. Forcing the lock open seemed a bad choice as well. The door frame looked to stand precariously as it was, robbed of a wall to hold it. Abigail sighed, standing back up straight. She had seen the pair coming here for the past week, talking about wild, magnificent things. She thought it strange that she couldn't find them again until they left at night. Now she understood why. It should feel bizarre to find out that they were stepping through a door to, well, she couldn't say where. Wherever it went, it wasn't where it should be going. The other side of a ruined building. Wherever it went, it was anywhere but here. Perhaps she could sneak in when they came tomorrow? She wasn't sure how, short of some sort of confrontation. Something inside her told her to try the door again. It was a silly thought. Doorknob wouldn't budge at all. Still, she decided to indulge the thought. Her thin fingers wrapped around the cold, corroded brass knob, and she tried to turn it. But unlike before, the knob twisted, slid the bolt out of the frame, and the door swung open. A cool, earthy breeze breathed out of the door as it opened. Through the threshold, she could see a smooth stone corridor with a bright light at the end. With the door still opened, she looked around the door from the outside again. There was nothing behind the door but open air and a pile of rubble. She came back to the opening, checking to make sure she hadn't imagined what she saw before. Yet there was the stone corridor that shouldn't exist. It was impossible, nonsensical, and surely meant she was just seeing things. Somehow, it felt right. Familiar, even. Abby grinned and eagerly stepped through the threshold. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust to the relative gloom of the corridor. She looked back just in time to see the door slam itself shut, and then fade into the stone wall that held it on this side. She couldn't help but chuckle. It would seem she was well past the point of no return. Carefully, she walked towards the bright light at the end of the corridor. A cool breeze kissed her cheeks as she came closer. Then she could finally see a field of green through the glare of the light beyond. Abigail took her first step into the new land and was overcome with wonder at the sight before her. She stood in a vast, rolling grassland dotted with what looked to be old stone buildings or ruins littered about the territory. A thick forest bordered to her left, and a single impressively tall mountain stood to her right. She thought she could see a lake or some other body of water just at the edge of what she could make out across the grassland. She turned around and was confronted with an imposing cliff face. Various cutouts and reliefs could be seen in the gray stone. As she marveled at the sight, Abby heard the sound of a throat clearing behind her. She whipped around to see the slender figure of a beautiful middle-aged woman with long, curly orangey red hair that undulated in the breeze. The woman frowned, looking at a stone tablet in her hand, and spoke in a husky British accent. "Not in uniform, unbathed, and late to boot, I see. Your name, child?" Abby blushed profusely and took a step back towards the stone corridor. The woman raised an eyebrow, the look all the more menacing on her sharp aquiline features. My, what intriguing names parents think of these days. It's not, Abigail stammered. I'll just be leaving. At that, she broke into a sprint down the corridor. When she reached the stone wall, she cursed to herself, having forgotten that the door had disappeared behind her. She hastily looked and probed about the wall, trying to find some hint of the door or way to get back. Why not use your key, child, if you are so intent on escape? Came the woman's voice from behind her again. Defeated, Abigail turned around and lowered her head. I don't have one. She could see the woman's posture shift, putting more weight on her right side. Really? Forgot that as well, did you? Eating artifacts like that unattended can be quite dangerous, you know. No, ma'am, I don't have one at all. She looked back up to meet the woman's eyes, embarrassment flushing hot over her face till she felt close to bursting in flames. But how could... The woman started. Then her sharp green eyes narrowed. She lowered the tablet. An outsider? But how? How did you get here? I followed a boy and a girl talking about amazing things, who I noticed coming to the same place around this time every day, and watched to see where they went. I was curious, you see. I saw them go through the door of a ruined office building next to the old Grayson Mill, and they just disappeared. Abigail looked down at her feet. Once they left, I tried to open the door, and it just opened. Impossible, the older woman said. She shifted her weight again to the other side. Your name, young lady? Abby looked back up to meet the woman's piercing gaze. Abigail Scott. I'm sorry for intruding. Truly, I'll just... The woman raised her hand and shook her head. Her instincts and something in the woman's eyes told Abby it was unwise to say anything further. She never ignored her instincts. She grabbed Abby's hand and marched out of the corridor. It was difficult for her to keep up with the older woman's longer legs and purposeful stride, but she managed to without tripping or lagging too far behind. Just what had she gotten herself into? It was far from the first time she had slipped in somewhere she didn't belong. Strangely enough, something told her she was exactly where she should be. She felt an uncanny sense that she had been in this place before, a sense that somehow this was her home. The very notion of feeling at home anywhere was foreign to her, but she couldn't shake the impression. They strode through grassy hills around the forest's edge, till they came to the marvelous sight of a network of buildings huddled to the side of a crystal-clear lake. There were a dozen or so structures. A tall, crisp, modern brick tower stood near the middle and was the tallest of them. But she could see buildings of various styles and apparent age mixed together. Some resembled drawings she had seen of old Roman or Greek temples. Others were more Gothic, like old cathedrals. She'd never seen anything like the collection, even in her dreams. The two pressed on, the older woman never breaking her brisk, unrelenting pace, till they entered what looked to be the oldest structure she had seen so far. Well, less a structure than what seemed to be a cave carved into a large, rocky outcrop that framed the cluster of buildings opposite of the lake. Strange incense mixed with an ever-present sting of earth filled her nose. Unfamiliar markings and paintings lined the hewn stone walls, spun into a blur by how fast the woman pulled her along. Abigail's legs were on fire, nearly on the verge of giving out by the time they blessedly came to a stop in a wide, open chamber. Motes of light drifted between stalactites, illuminating what had to be a natural cavern. A still pool of water, like a sheet of glass, sat at the far side of the chamber. The woman looked back to her, those piercing eyes digging into her again. But there was something different in them this time that Abby couldn't read. That terrified her. She prided herself on being able to understand what people were thinking, It had been a kind of gift of hers that kept her safe all those years since. A man with thick spectacles and the thickest salt and pepper beard Abby had ever seen walked up from behind the woman. He was somewhat shorter than the woman was, but still taller than Abby by a head and a half. He had an accent that sounded somewhat vaguely European, but she couldn't put her finger on where. "Now, Lauren, what do you have in your talents today? Not often that we bring students in for being out of uniform." "She is not a student, Ferris," the woman said, looking to the man. He adjusted his spectacles and looked at Abby again. "Are you quite sure? She looks like one to me. Her aura is fierce, unbridled, like so many her age." "Quite. I thought the same. But she isn't a student. She followed some students in."
"How could she manage that without a key?" the man said.
His dark cloud of a beard completely obscured his mouth, making it seem as though the wiggling of the beard itself was what produced his words.
"Exactly my question, Ferris,"
the woman whom the man had called Lauren said. Another voice came from behind in an unidentifiable accent. "Unless she was let in by the three." Abigail whipped her head around to see a cleanly shaven man with coppery skin that had a metallic sheen to it.
"Nonsense! Something like that hasn't happened in centuries. There's no need. They've directed us to enroll likely prospects since, the First Crusade?"
Ferris remarked. Lauren didn't seem to share the same thought, but said nothing. That unreadable look was in her eyes as she looked back to Abby. Then she smiled? After seeing nothing but what seemed to be the woman's naturally stern, almost predatory visage, the sight of a smile curl on her aquiline features seemed almost incongruous. The man stepped closer. He was a mountain of a man, impressively tall, easily the tallest of the group, and probably double Abby's height. Even through his simple suit, she could see that he might have been the most well-muscled man she had ever seen.
"Your name, young lady?"
"It's Abigail Scott," she said, shifting uneasily. She never liked being the center of attention. The strangeness of the situation, and really everything since she had decided to follow the two, apparently students, did not help set her at ease.
"Could you tell me of your family, Miss Scott?"
"I'm alone. Abby shook her head. I'm sorry, I don't remember much about them." Lauren and the strange man shared a look as Abby lowered her eyes in embarrassment. The older woman spoke again. "I'd like you to try something for me. Let's call it a test." Abigail's eyes shot back up as Lauren held out a small glass sphere. Take this in both hands. Close your eyes and try to clear your mind," the older woman said softly. She did as instructed, the last step, of course, much more difficult than it sounded. She had never been particularly great at clearing her mind of anything, especially not in this moment. "Now, I want you to open your eyes and focus on the sphere in your hands. I want you to think about the most important thing in the world to you, the thing that gets you out of bed every morning, or keeps you striving even when you want to give up." Lauren cleared her throat and continued. "Dig deep. Really find that spark. It usually boils down to a single word or idea or phrase. Once you find that thing, I want you to put it into that sphere." "Put it in how?" Abby asked, raising an eyebrow. Lauren smiled warmly in a way that seemed to instantly ease her anxiety. You will know how, or you won't. It's as simple as that. How will I know if it worked? Oh, that. Lauren grinned. Believe me, there will be no doubt. Abby looked back at the sphere, confused but intrigued. What was the most important thing to her? Survival? Wouldn't that be the most important thing for anyone? No, people did things every day that was contrary to their survival. She had seen it herself sleeping on the streets of Old Town. No, survival was just an easy answer. If survival was the most important thing to her, why would she waste her time following those students when she could have been trying to get enough money to eat? What was the most important thing to her? Why would she do something that would run against her survival? What did she want from that? What did she hope for in stepping through that door? Change. The word ripped through her like a gust of wind blasting away stale air. That was what she desired more than anything else. To change. To get away from the life she had been living. To be something more. Suddenly she could feel the thought coursing through her veins, pushing her forward. But forward to where? Her eyes locked onto the sphere, and in that moment, she understood. Abigail pushed the idea into the sphere with her raw desire and hopes. And before her eyes, the sphere sparked into life. A roiling, surging cloud filled the inside of the sphere, twisting and contorting into a cyclone that, somehow, she knew represented change. She looked up to the older woman, and Lauren smiled. Congratulations, my newest elementalist. I'd like to be the first to invite you to study at Avalon Academy of the Arcane. She extended her hand out to Abigail. How would you like to learn how to use magic? Number 2. Tea time. Garrett. So I tried again and I just couldn't connect with the fulcrum. It was like it was someone else's, Lucas said, talking about class from earlier in the day. Garrett Grant sighed and shrugged. I guess you'll have to keep practicing. Practice? Come now, you really think that's what I need? If I practice, that just leaves less time for other things. Things that... Lucas kept speaking, but Garrett's attention had drifted away from the unstoppable hurricane that was Lucas's style of one-sided conversation. His eyes fixed on her again, the waitress who had served the tea Lucas and he shared. She was talking with a pair of academy professors, taking their orders presumably. The two of them chuckled, perhaps having told a joke, and she giggled along. By the 3. Even in the subdued candlelight, her smile was truly magnificent. Then she left, weaving her way through the tables past his own, like a dancer tiptoeing her way across a stage. Her black and white dress and pristine white apron rippled as she moved. As she passed, the sense of vanilla and lavender filled his nostrils, mixing with the aroma of the Earl Grey before him. He grinned dumbly, watching as she slipped behind the counter where all manner of tea, coffee, and other beverage-making apparatus could be seen. Hey, what are you smiling about? What's the matter with you? Think it's funny that I lost my pet hamster? He heard. Then Garrett snapped his attention back to Lucas. Well, no, that's horrible. Forget about it. Happened 10 years ago anyway. But you! Lucas pointed an accusatory finger, his bushy brown eyebrows lowering as he narrowed his hazel eyes. You were watching her again, weren't you? He looked back over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of her as her deft hands carefully placed just the right amount of tea leaves in the fine teapot in front of her on the counter. Who wouldn't? Jesus, man, you watch her in class, you watch her here. Hell, the whole reason we come here after class is because she works here in the first place. Why don't you just ask Tabitha out already? Lucas said, taking a sip of tea, his lips curled in disgust. Oh, but I... Garrett shook his head. No, just no. Lucas, she wouldn't want to go out with someone like me. Gary, you better do something. I mean, geez, what the hell is this stuff anyway? Lucas said, sniffing the tea disapprovingly. Earl Grey, her favorite. She lets it steep longer than normal to bring out the exact flavor she's looking for, Garrett said, watching Tabitha set a full tea set on a silver tray. She had a way of placing things that just felt so right. Like that was exactly where it should have always been. Lucas scoffed. Well, it tastes like I'm eating a flower with a side of grass clippings. Why can't we drink coffee? She doesn't like coffee. Great for her. I like coffee. You like coffee. We should drink coffee, Lucas said. He could hear him take another sip. She put a plate of tea cakes on the tray, along with a cream and sugar cup. Gary, damn it, look at me! And Garrett did so, finding Lucas a bit more red in the face than usual. Buddy, I'm not coming anymore if you don't do something. This is sad to watch. The least you could do is man up and ask the girl. He gestured wildly, hands over his heart. Take pity on me, Gary. Do it for me. I can't watch this anymore. And then her sweet, sing-song voice rang in his ears. Do you need something? Garrett looked up, and there she was. Smooth, pale skin, large, dark brown eyes, and long, blonde hair held up in a bun. A loose, curly lock of hair framed the left side of her face. She held the tray she had set up at the counter by the handles on either side. She was looking to Lucas. His waving and flailing must have caught her attention. He smirked mischievously to Garrett, and then looked to Tabitha. Oh dear, not me, but my best bud, Gary, really needed to say something. Garrett's heart plummeted. He could feel the blood in his veins turn to ice as that wonderful face turned his way. Her eyebrows raised expectantly. His mouth made half noises and sputtered, completely unhelpful in the light of her eyes. All he could really manage was to smile and raise his teacup. Are you trying to say you like it? She said, tilting her head to the side. A stray lock of hair swung out free in the open, tense air without a care in the world. He nervously nodded. His vocal cords had apparently decided to rebel against him, disobeying any demands he made, though his jaw and lips were not much better. She beamed, and what a glorious smile it was. Thank you! Just let me know if you'd like more. I'd be happy to brew some more. And then she was off, weaving her way through the crowded cafe. Jesus Christ, Gary, I think that was the most painful, awkward thing I've ever seen in my life, Lucas said, setting his cup down. You're hopeless. I don't say that about anyone, but geez, if anyone is, it's you. You can't even talk to the broad. Don't talk about her like that, she's a goddess, Garrett said, perhaps too sharply. Lucas held up his hands. I surrender. No need to threaten me with a teacup of all things. Garrett hadn't noticed he had pointed the delicate cup towards the New York native. Look, if all you do is watch her, how are you going to get to know her? I know a lot about her. She's in the top 10 of our class. Her favorite food is... Garrett started. Buddy, this isn't no questionnaire, no pop quiz. Lucas interrupted. Sure, you might know some facts about her, but you don't know why. Why does she like what she likes? Hell, do you even know why she works here? Garrett looked down at his teacup, watching the brown, mirror-like surface of the tea reflect his face. I think I've made my point, Lucas said, as he got up from his plush leather armchair. Where are you going? Lucas chuckled. I'm going home, Gary. And you should too if you're just gonna stay here and stare at the poor girl like a creep. I'll see you tomorrow. Garrett waved a goodbye, watching his friend leave through the stained glass front door. He scanned the cafe for Tabitha, but couldn't see her. Perhaps she had gone in the back to take a break. Lucas was right. He had tried to talk to her multiple times, but he always froze up around her, too afraid he would say something wrong. Who was he kidding? Everything he ever said was wrong. He took another sip of tea, but even its soothing warmth and aroma wasn't enough to make it any less true. And then, the most miraculous thing happened. From seemingly nowhere, an angelic figure came to sit at the armchair Lucas had sat in, and set her apron down at the table between them. It was Tabitha. As their eyes met, she smiled and said, "Do you mind if I keep you company while I take a break?" Number 3. Welcome home. Abigail. Lauren led Abby to a large wooden building at the other side of campus, which sat on a grassy hill that overlooked the rest of what might as well have been a small city. A lithe young woman hung up what looked to be bed sheets at a row of clotheslines off to the side. An impeccably maintained garden framed the border of the area and wrapped around to the front of the building. Dozens of different kinds of flowers flooded the stretch, but Abby really didn't know the names of any of them. The symphony of scents carried from the flowers to her nose immediately set her at ease. "Willa, dear, how are you?" Lauren said, curly copper hair loosely telegraphing the breeze. "I know you aren't bringing another stray cat to me. Your last one nearly burned his room and himself down," Willa said, in a rapid accent Abby guessed was Scottish or Irish, without turning around to face them. She kept going about hanging up the sheets. Abby was amazed at the speed the woman was able to work, barely able to keep up with her hands as she whipped the sheets from a basket, cast them across the waiting line, and then pinned them into place with clips she appeared to keep in her stark, straight black hair. She was tall, maybe a head or so more than Abby, and looked to be in her early 20s, but Abby couldn't be sure. "Abigail, I would like to introduce you to Willa Anderson. She's a keeper here at the Academy for Elementalist. They take care of housing, food, and other necessity for our students who live at the Academy rather than commute." Headmistress Corvinus, as Abby had learned she should call Lauren, said. "Wait, live here? You mean I can stay here?" Abby didn't even try to hide the excitement in her voice. The headmistress smiled that same comforting smile. "Surely you didn't think we'd have you living on the streets? How would you be able to focus on your studies without a sound roof overhead and a full stomach?" As if on cue, Abby's stomach audibly growled, causing her to blush in embarrassment. Suddenly, Willa stood next to Abby, bright green eyes examining her closely. "Oh, poor dear. When last did you eat?" Abby smiled weakly. Yesterday morning, I think." "You think? 3 keep me." Willa sighed and shook her head, then pointed to the headmistress. "You and I will handle the I's and T's later." She looked back to Abby and pulled her towards the building's front door. "Right now, let's get you fed and cleaned up. Where did Lauren find you, a trash heap? Afraid them rags are a lost cause. We'll get you set in something decent." Like a loose leaf tossed about in a storm, Abby was pushed and pulled around the halls of the building. The walls and doors around her whipped past as the tempest of a woman swept her in a furious cyclone. Abruptly, she was stripped of her clothes and thrown in a large bathing chamber. She yelped in surprise, feeling helplessly exposed. "Oh, 'twon't bite you. That spring has been washing sore and tired bodies for millennia. Wash up with them buckets there and soak. Just relax for a spot and I'll be back," Willa said. Abby turned her head around to say thank you, but by the time she did, Willa was already bounding through the door to the chamber. She was amazed by the speed and purpose with which the woman could move. She found herself somewhat unconvinced that humans could move like that. Through the blanket of steam that filled the room, the chamber looked to be divided into two sections, one with stools and buckets, and the other half with a large pool, a communal bath of sorts. It looked as though she was alone, which somewhat set her at ease. Even thinking about someone seeing her like this, so vulnerable and uncertain, made her cheeks burn. She saw what looked to be a fogged-up mirror next to her and wiped some of the condensation from the cool surface. A wretched, soiled face looked back at her. Its features were unfamiliar at first, but then she depressingly admitted that it was her own face. Those plain brown eyes were definitely hers, as was that mess of tangled black hair. It had probably been a month since she had been able to bathe, even longer since she had seen herself in a mirror. She nodded to herself, setting her mind to the task at hand. Where she came from, if you had a chance to bathe, you took it. Usually, though, she'd have a knife or something to chase off others, but that had been whisked away with her clothes. She washed away much of the caked-on dirt and grime with a bucket of water from the pool. Well, one was far from enough. It probably took at least 7 to clear away the worst of it. A bar of soap she found helped clear her poor skin of even more, and even helped her hair start to feel, well, like hair again. As clean as she could manage, she dipped her scrawny body into the pool. The water was impressively warm, cutting through her skin to soothe her aches. A ledge in the wall allowed her to sit in the pool with the water coming up to her chin. She sighed in relief as she laid her head back on the smooth stone wall that held the water in. For the first time since, well, a long time, she actually let herself relax. No cutthroats peeking at her from around the corner, plotting God knows what. No desperate creatures looking to steal away what little nothing she had. All that mattered in that moment was the warmth of the water. She felt much more exhausted than she would have expected, but it was probably just because she was hungry. Again, with almost uncanny timing, her stomach growled. It wasn't an unfamiliar sound to her. After a while, she felt she had stayed in the pool for far too long, and she got up out of the pool. As she got up, she saw what looked to be a pair of towels and something else lay next to it, beside the door where she came into the chamber. She wrapped one around her body and the other around her head, and then examined the other article. It looked to be some kind of robe. She didn't remember any of these sitting there before. Suddenly, Willa came bursting from the door and started, obviously not expecting Abby to be out of the bath yet. "Three keep me, pet? Suppose there were a lass under all that soot after all?" Abby blushed and lowered her eyes as Willa led her out of the bathing chamber to what must have been a dressing room of sorts. She hadn't noticed it before, though she hadn't been able to notice much of anything in the whirlwind that took her to the bathing chamber. Willa looked her over, muttering to herself. "Miss Willa?" Abigail started. Willa visibly flinched, waving in the air as though she were shooing away a fly in her face. "Ugh, just Willa, lass, just Willa." Abby nodded, hesitating as the other woman unwrapped the towel from around her head and started carefully going through her hair with a comb. "Right, Willa, that pool, how is it heated?" "That one's a natural hot spring, of course," So, not with magic? Willa snorted. Oh, no need. Besides, using magic for something like that would be a waste. A waste? Abigail winced as the comb came to a stubborn tangle. Oh, could do with a haircut, poor dear, she said, muttering to herself. Magic is difficult, of course. Using magic for something as frivolous as heating a bath is like baking an entire loaf of bread to only take a single bite. Really? I guess that makes sense. Willa kept working at Abby's hair while Abigail thought to herself. Though uneasy about being touched, she had to admit that feeling the other woman's skilled hands at work was rather comforting. Then something came to her. Willa, what did you mean by the headmistress bringing you stray cats? She asked. She heard the other woman sigh, but she didn't stop her work. Suppose I did say that. Lauren is... Willa cleared her throat. Well, she has a soft spot for the wayward, the abandoned, or those who have nowhere else to turn. They probably remind her of herself since she was once so lost herself. But that's a story for her to tell, not me. I think I understand. And Abby did. Something in the headmistress's eyes lit up when she realized she wasn't a student. Now that look was starting to make sense. Suffice it to say, she isn't the only one who only truly found herself when she came here, Willa said before falling silent. After a long while of careful combing, Willa sighed and stepped away. Done what I can for now. We'll have to give you a cut after you've had something to eat. You'll have to live with short hair for a while, I'm afraid, pet. After Willa had gotten Abigail in the robe, she led her to another part of the building, though this time at nearly normal human walking speed. They came to what must have been the kitchen. Smooth stone counters flanked a stove set, and an old brick oven. The opposite wall held a large fireplace with a lazily smoldering fire, as well as several shelves that held plates, pans, and other various instruments and utensils. A large pot sat at the stove, which Willa dashed over to tend to, lifting the lid and stirring the contents with a large ladle. Abby stood awkwardly in the door as her nose caught a wonderful array of scents, both familiar and far from. Her empty stomach roared in response, no longer content with simply growling. Whatever Willa was cooking smelled marvelous. Come sit, child, she said before grabbing a bowl, scooping out some of what appeared to be stew out of the pot, and placing the bowl on one of the tables with a single stool. Abigail sat down and eagerly grabbed at the bowl, shoveling down the contents as fast as she could. Willa just watched, either in horror or amazement. Abigail couldn't say. She picked up the bowl and licked it, trying to get every bit of the stew she possibly could before setting the bowl down again. Then, as if finally catching up with her, the taste of the stew came to her in a rush. Beef and root vegetables danced about on her taste buds with an overwhelming wave of savory spices and salt, proudly carrying the entire assembly of flavors. She couldn't even begin to try to describe it aloud. It easily had to be the most luxurious meal she had eaten since... Willa just chuckled. Abby must have made some dumb expression when she finally was able to taste what she had so ravenously consumed. Suppose you'd like more? I can have more? Of course you can, pet. At that, Willa grabbed the bowl and filled it with stew before handing it to Abby again. Where did the good headmistress fish you out of anyway? Willa asked as she put the lid back on the well-worn pot. Well, Abigail started, unsure of exactly what to say. She didn't, I guess? Headmistress Corvinus found me this morning after I snuck in through a door a couple students used. Willa froze and turned her head around at a seemingly impossible angle. Snuck in? Why not use your admission key? I don't have one, Abigail said reluctantly. Willa started. Didn't I have a key? Abigail just shook her head in response. The three goddesses must have let you in. But why? Abigail shrugged. I don't really know. I don't even know who the three are. Didn't know the three? Child, do you even know where you are? Abby again just shook her head in response. You know nothing of this place? Avalon? The Academy? Do you even know about magic? Willa said, slipping over to Abby, an astonished look on her face. No, not really. Well, I've heard stories about Avalon. You know, King Arthur and all. Abby lowered her eyes, the intense, inquisitive look in Willa's eyes difficult for her to bear. And magic, well, I've never seen anything like what happened with that sphere. I've seen street magicians, but everyone knows they're fake. Willa took a step back, dumbfounded, then locked eyes with Abby. You used the sphere, did you? You passed the test? The first time you tried it? Right, yes. I could hardly believe my eyes. Abigail cocked her head to the side. Why, doesn't everyone? By the three, Willa breathed, a look of utter bewilderment on her pale porcelain features. No wonder you asked me how the spring was heated. All of it is new to you. She then locked eyes with Abby. Listen, child. This place, all of it, is a place of learning about the Arcane, the powers that make up the universe. Like science? Willa shook her head. Science only investigates and explains what it can see and touch. Magic is something deeper. Something that can't be explained. Only understood. The hidden threads that hold our world together and shaped her in her earliest days. Magic is everything and nothing. And all living things have a connection to it. All living things? Abby asked. Of course, everything in existence is connected to magic, but life has a special relationship with magic. It can shape magic in advantageous ways. It's how so many creatures are capable of otherwise inexplicable feats and abilities. Abigail thought for a moment, then asked, So, if living things can use magic, why don't people? Why doesn't everyone use it? Some do and will never realize it. They put a kind of pressure on their environment, but it is so subtle so as to be unnoticeable or cause them exhaustion. Willa then came to sit at the table with Abby, pulling up a stool from some unseen corner. But most just aren't aware, and may never be. We call them latent. Few others choose not to use or to forget magic. They're usually referred to as recused. Choose? Why would someone choose something like that? Willa smiled weakly. Afraid I didn't understand it myself, dear. Abby considered what she had heard. It seems so simple now. So, most people will never realize their connection. Is it kind of like how people can have talents they never knew? How some people are naturals at playing an instrument or something like that? A Keenan, aren't you, pet? Willa smirked and nodded. If you never tried something, you'll never know if you have an affinity with it. Most people will never see real magic, at least in a way they could understand it. So they will never have the push to try and tap into it themselves. It also didn't help that magic is incredibly difficult to use and control. But some can without even knowing they can? Abby asked. Exactly right. Some have a natural, reflexive, instinctive control that is usually awakened by some kind of traumatic event or from a transcendent level of mastery of a craft or skill. We call them reflexives. In fact, the first magic users were metal workers who started to realize they could control their forges without even touching them, pushing them hotter and burning longer, and they'd be able to normally. Eventually, that reflexive control became something they were conscious of, and they eventually were called here. Willa gestured around with her arms. We call it Avalon now, but it has had countless names throughout the ages. I'm sure you've heard the name Atlantis or some other lost continent or island. Abby nodded her head, deep in thought about what she had heard. Somehow, none of this truly surprised her. It just seemed to make sense. She hadn't known she could do what she did with the sphere until she had done it, which made her think of another question. Why are you surprised about me passing the sphere test? Willa's eyes snapped back to Abigail. They were harder again, a bit of that disbelief painted on her face. Child, very, very few passed that test on their first attempt. In fact, I believe the last one who did it was Headmistress Corvinus herself. Most study for at least a year, some even more than that, practicing with a sphere before they pass. What does the test mean? Why is it special? Abby asked. The test determines your future at the Academy. You see, not all students learn the same way, or can do the same things. There's 3 major kinds of magic, which some call affinities, and each needs a very different approach to teaching. This divides the Academy up into factions made up of those with similar affinities. You must have tested as an elementalist if you're here and Lauren brought you. Willa suddenly shook her head, as if snapped out of a trance. But enough of that, dear. You need to eat. Then we'll see about what room to put you in. Abby grabbed at the bowl of stew, now likely cold, before hesitating. Is it really alright for me to have this? Any of this? Willa looked as though she had been struck. Why would it not be, Pat? It's just... Suddenly, Abby's vision grew blurry, tears welling up as her cheeks flushed hot in embarrassment. She lowered her eyes to the table, and then she felt a pair of arms wrap around her. Oh, lass, life hasn't been kind to you, has it? Willa whispered as she tightened her embrace. Abigail could only shake her head in response. Well, that ends today. You're under my care now, Willa said softly. With that, Abigail couldn't stop herself from crying. It all seemed too good to be true. She was sure that she'd wake up and be right back in that same slum, begging for scraps and fighting to keep the others from taking what little nothing she had. The other woman gently rubbed her back as she sobbed, murmuring, There, no. As she slowly regained her composure, the older woman turned Abby's face to look at her. We'll talk about everything later. For now, eat as much as you'd like. It was the most wonderful words Abby thought she'd ever heard. Number 4. Hushed Whispers. Kokoro.
My good Kokoro, it's been such a long time, said Darius as Kokoro stepped through the front door of the Sleepy Town pub. Water droplets from the downpour outside rolled off of her black coat in the subdued lighting. She kept her coat hood raised. The pub was empty, save for Darius, with most of the chairs flipped up on the tables, save for those at the bar itself. She had come at such an off hour for a reason. Salvos of rain droplets pelted the large glass window in the front, filling the air with a constant percussive rumble. Darius was a great tree of a man, looking more like muscle for a nightclub than the proprietor of an easygoing bar. Of course, in a previous life, he had been just that. So large was he that even pint glasses looked to be shot glasses in his thick, gnarly hands. I heard about Kumar. It's just awful business. Kokoro just stared at the man from the entrance,
watching as he wiped the bar top by force of habit. He was trying too hard to act casual, she thought. Maybe she was onto something.
Kokoro, are you alright? Do you want to talk about it?
Darius said, pausing in his work. Did he come here? She said coldly. Darius seemed puzzled at first, then shook his head, turning his dark eyes back to the bar.
Of course not, Koko.
Don't lie to me.
I swear, Kokoro, I haven't seen him in here for the better part of a year. Ever since that big fight you two had, he hasn't set foot in here, said Darius, looking back at her, then waving a hand in dismissal. Kokoro's eyes narrowed, her voice tense as she did her best to control herself. Kumar came here every Friday night for 24 years. Do you expect me to believe he didn't even sneak back here for a pint in all that time? I don't know how many times I can tell you the same thing. God's honest truth, Koko. Come on, it's me!
The man lifted his burly arms in a sign of surrender, looking around in an exaggerated gesture made all the more ridiculous by his size.
Why would I lie to you? You were here with him most of those 24 years. I've got no reason to lie.
You would if you were involved or trying to cover for him. Did he meet someone here? Was someone trying to get him? Anyone with a grudge? Kokoro said. She took a step closer to the bar, with a hand at the ready in her pocket. She knew he wasn't telling her the whole truth, maybe not lying, but there was something he wasn't saying. The way he kept breaking eye contact told her as much. Darius took a step back behind the old, time-worn wooden bar.
Koko, do you really think I'd be involved in something like that? I'm just as surprised as you are. Kumar paid his tab on time, always bought the house around on payday. Knew pretty much everyone who came here. Even gave them free counseling. What was there not to like about the guy?
You know what I've learned in all the time I've known you? Darius's eyebrows raised at the question. There is no one you don't know in this town, and not a thing happens that you don't know about. It has always been your gift. Darius smirked, twisting his charcoal-colored mustache.
Is that so? Where did you say you came from before you moved to town again?
Kokoro sighed. I didn't.
See? Sorry to break it to you, but there is a lot I don't know, even if I am pretty decent at acting like I do. There's been a lot going on in this town recently that I haven't got a clue about,
Darius said, lowering his hands as he went back to work cleaning the bar.
Stories about impossible things, rumors of angry ghosts. It's just like the old tales.
Kokoro took another step forward. This was something she had only heard in hushed whispers. If she could learn more. What stories? What have you heard?
Just stories, sweetheart. Nothing worth repeating. Likely just a bunch of, how you say, mumbo-jumbo to cover something else up.
He looked back to her, that jovial twinkle in his eyes gone.
You know better than I do that there are some things better left unknown.
Ignorance is bliss, huh? Kokoro scoffed. Darius shrugged.
Bliss, ignorance, relative terms. I just don't want to see you end up the way he did.
Kokoro's eyes narrowed even further, anger building quickly. Is that a threat?
You know I don't make threats anymore, sweetheart. Those days are way past me. Just an old friend who doesn't want to see another friend's name in the wrong part of the newspaper," he said before walking back to the storeroom. "He wasn't just a friend to me," Kokoro said as she turned around and stepped through the entrance. A curtain of rain greeted her back to a waterlogged, vacuous street. It was impossible to tell the time of day through the stormy gloom, but the empty parking spots and lack of cars going to and fro on the street was enough to judge that it was late morning. People would start to show up around noon for a bite to eat or a liquid lunch, but there was still probably an hour before that. She sighed and started walking down the sidewalk aimlessly. Kokoro hadn't thought she would learn much of anything from Darius, but she hoped that he would have at least known something. She'd already exhausted all of her old contacts from when she wore a badge. She'd even knocked on a few doors of the types she'd never have dared to if she hadn't been grasping at straws, but that hadn't been any help either. Their last fight echoed in her mind again. She had been just so angry at the time. Thinking back now, there wasn't a single word of it she didn't regret. She was just confused, felt left in the dark after Kumar had stopped talking to her. Her last words to him, in particular, stung all the more with the twisted benefit of hindsight. "If you are so intent on shutting me out, then just get out of my life." It was strange how often words she didn't really mean to say ended up coming true. It was a lesson she could never seem to learn. She slipped a little as the incline on the sidewalk increased. A miniature waterfall, flushed into life by a gushing gutter downspout and the flow of water from uphill, made the walkway even more hazardous, as her boots flooded with storm water. Kokoro frowned in disgust. As usual, when it rained, it poured. Carefully, she got up the hill and around the corner to a stretch less treacherous. She looked next to her and saw a heavy metal door with a sign with big red letters that read, "Employee entrance only." Of course she'd stop next to a door. Kokoro knew what she had to do. She'd been trying to avoid it for the past 3 weeks. She was out of options. Every dead lead she had dug up since his death had just made it all the more clear that the one thing she said she'd never do was the only choice she had left. If she really wanted to know what happened, there was only one way to find out. She hooked a finger around the leather cord around her neck and pulled out what looked to be an old wrought iron key that hung from the cord under her blouse. Kokoro sighed, staring at the dull metal as a coating of raindrops developed on the hammered surface. Cursing to herself, she brought the cord over her head and then turned to the door. She touched the key to the keyhole. It was much too large for the lock, yet as the tip made contact, the archaic key sunk into the brushed metal lock face till she had it about halfway buried. She then turned the key and felt that once familiar click and twisted the door handle. That sweet floral breeze breathed out as she opened the door to a field of pink and purple flowers. It was a sharp contrast to what one might expect from what seemed to be a dreary concrete warehouse. She stepped through the doorway, pulling her key out as she did, and the door quickly closed itself behind her. She looked back and saw the familiar stone archway that had stood in this field for millennia, framing the image of the door she had used, as it faded into the open air. Well, well, well. Not every day I have a recluse step through my door. Kokoro's skin crawled as she heard the man's too smooth voice.
She turned to see Warren Ramirez sitting at a table just a few steps to the left of the door. He wore his typical black pinstripe suit with an overcoat draped about the back of his chair. He took a sip from a teacup. She could smell the sharp sting of his favorite spiced tea cut through the aroma of the flowers of the field. The sun was setting off in the horizon, scattering golden light across the lake and the rolling grassy hills. Kokoro walked over next to the open chair he obviously had left waiting for her, but did not sit. "Let me guess. You've been waiting for me." Warren smirked, though his cold hazel eyes told a different story, as usual. "As always." The two shared a look for a moment. Then she rolled her eyes and sat down in the chair. More than a decade away, and he was still just as infuriating. "Well then, it truly is just like old times, is it not?" Warren said, an annoyingly pleased look twisting his statuesque features. His eyes, though, never lost that dull, ambivalent feel to them. They never failed to send a chill down her spine. "I know you know why I'm here," she started. Warren nodded. "Of course. It's part of my job to know." "So it was a scourge, wasn't it?" "Honestly. Given the burned out eyes, I'm surprised that you wasted time treating your husband's death as a normal homicide. Though, I suppose the stab wound in the heart is more than enough for a latent." He took a sip of tea. "You sure have been quite busy, haven't you? Are you sure you shook every tree you could before coming to me?" Kokoro growled in frustration. He could still get under her skin as effortlessly as breathing, even though it had been more than a decade since they had last seen each other. Well, since she had seen him, at least. "You know why I didn't want to come. Why I wanted to be wrong. Besides, you know as well as I do that their hunting behavior isn't all that different from that of a serial killer. It wouldn't be the first time a scourge wreaked havoc on the latent. Just look at the Ripper." "Of course, the latent never did find him. Unlike us." Warren laughed, those mirthless eyes all the more unsettling. "Oh, I know exactly why you didn't want to come. I remember every word you said back then, when you recused yourself from this life. Do you remember what I told you then?" Embarrassed, she looked down at her lap. They had had plenty of arguments over the years. They had worked together, but worst of all was what she had assumed would be their final conversation. Well, conversation was being generous for what was largely a ferocious tirade on her part, followed by a single sentence from Warren as she walked away. She grudgingly repeated it now. "You'll be back, and you'll need my help." That smirk was back. "And here you are, and behold, you need my help." "Can you?" "Always. But there will be a price, of course," Warren said. Kokoro closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't have a choice. "Name it." Warren smiled wide, those lifeless eyes gleaming in the slowly waning sunlight. Number 5. Anvil of Initiation. Abigail. "Well, students, I have a bit of a surprise for you today. A new addition to our ranks. Please welcome Miss Abigail Scott," said the headmistress in front of a morning gathering for the elementalists at the academy. Abby wasn't sure if all of the elementalists were present, but there had to be at least 150 in the crowd. They all wore roughly matching brown vests, brown trousers or skirts, and blue silk coats, with wonderfully intricate embroidery. Some had darker blue coats, whereas others seemed to have a kind of mantle. They had met at what Lauren had called the Anvil of Initiation, a small clearing in the woods that formed part of the border around the Academy campus. A hunk of metal with a smooth, flat, polished top sat in the middle of the clearing. It looked positively ancient, primordial. Moss and vines clung to the base of the mass. The whole clearing had a strange air about it. It felt special, sacred even. Abby awkwardly stepped forward and thought she stood like a child trying to sneak away a handful of sweets in the middle of the night. There were far too many faces looking at her at once for her to feel anywhere near normal. She could feel her cheeks and forehead burn under all the curious, probing eyes. She will be joining the initiate class effective immediately. Please take care of her, as she is new to Avalon, even the concept of magic in general. She will need every bit of guidance and support you can offer her, Lauren continued. Abby looked to her as she spoke. She could still feel the eyes of the crowd on her. The headmistress then pointed to a young man near the back of the crowd. Scholar Reynard, please come to me. The rest of you, on to your studies. Remember that Master Ironhand will be in tomorrow for forging training. At that, she rang a small brass bell, and the people started going their separate ways. A man who seemed to be in his early 20s, with a blue silk head wrap, walked up to the headmistress and bowed his head. You asked for me? Lauren smiled warmly. Reynard, look at you. No longer an apprentice. How does it feel? It is a sincere honor, Headmistress Corvinus, Reynard said, bowing his head again. Abby noticed that his coat was one that was darker than her own. It made the embroidered peacocks, swirls, and waves stand out all the more from the serene background. If I remember correctly, you have yet to take on any initiates or apprentices, yes? Lauren said, crossing her arms against the chill as a cool morning breeze coursed through the rolling grassy hills. Not yet. Most have a scholar, master already to study under. There's even less understudies now than there were in my first year. Wonderful, the headmistress smiled. I should like you to take on Miss Scott, if you have no objections. Renard looked curiously over to Abby. She thought she caught a touch of concern or doubt in his almost purple eyes. Then he looked back to Lauren. Are you sure that I'm best suited for her? Perhaps someone with more experience would... Nonsense. She's a rather ideal first understudy for you. No preconceptions, eager for guidance, and most importantly, she's incredibly talented. The headmistress smiled confidently, placing a hand on Reynard's shoulder. She passed the test on her first try without any training whatsoever. Shock surged through Renard's face. His eyes looked close to bursting from their sockets. He looked over Abby again, then back to the headmistress. You must surely be joking. The last one to do that was... Lauren nodded. Red hair tossed about behind her in a particularly energetic gust that pressed her elaborate blue robes against her slender body. Exactly. Believe me. You are the first mentor I thought of for her. But if you'd... That won't be necessary, headmistress. It would be my honor. I will not betray the confidence and trust you have put in me, Renard said, bowing with his right fist over his heart. Excellent, the older woman said with an approving grin. You may proceed. Renard walked over to the opposite side of the hunk of metal and then turned to Abigail, standing up straight as a statue. He tried to hide it, but she could see the nerves in his eyes. He was probably just as anxious as she was. Miss Scott, please take a knee. She did so, almost falling over in the process in her rush to comply. Your full name, please, he asked.
Abigail Clarissa Scott.
He nodded, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. This was obviously an important moment for him, and, she guessed, for her as well. Renard locked eyes with Abby and withdrew a hammer from his pockets. He held it above his head, and energy sparked around the head of the hammer. He spoke in a clear, if a bit shaky voice. Miss Abigail Clarissa Scott, I call to you to serve as my apprentice, that you may learn what I have learned and build a thriving understanding of the forces that compose our world. By the three goddesses, I swear to you that I shall be your guide in your education, your torch through the darkness of doubt. I shall look after you and protect you through your trials and lessons, and help you in your journey. He took another deep breath. By the three goddesses, do you swear to follow my guidance, to uphold the virtues of honor, service, and scholarship, as you learn and grow in this sacred land of Avalon? Abby's heart stood still. The world about her seemed to move slower than it should, as a leaf from a tree lazily sauntered about in an unseen breeze. She could feel the gravity of this moment. Once she agreed, she knew that there would be no way back. Something told her to bow her head, and she did so. I swear. Her heart pounded as she spoke the words, and time seemed to resume its normal course. She raised her head again. Renard smiled, and he brought the hammer down in front of him onto the ancient anvil. A ringing sound resonated through the clearing, lingering far longer than it should. Then he raised the hammer and brought it down again, and again, and again. Each time, the ringing seemed to last a little longer, but somehow become more warm, even pleasing to the ears, like an instrument being tuned. She could feel the energy in the air building till he brought the hammer down a final time, and the world seemed to snap into sharper focus than ever before. Renard put the hammer back to where he had extracted it before and walked around the hunk of metal so he could stand before Abby. He clutched something in his hands. Rise, my apprentice, and claim your rightful place with my first gift to you. Abigail stood from where she had knelt, and he held out his hands, opening them so that she could see within. It was a key, old in design, made of what she supposed was wrought iron. She picked it up in both hands and felt a surge of sensation wash over her. This was something sacred, something irreplaceable. Then it hit her. This was a key, just like the key the students she had followed must have used. You now belong to this land of Avalon. When there is no other home for you, she will shelter you. Ever shall your heart yearn for this new homeland when you are away. Should you leave, you will always be able to return through nearly any doorway. For while Avalon exists in one place and time, it is connected to all. Renard said quietly to her as she looked back to him. 9 strikes made that key, 1 for each of the sacred elements that compose our world, 1 for each of the first voyagers to this land. Welcome, Initiate Scott. Abigail bowed her head, tears forming in her eyes. To her side came the clapping of hands of Headmistress Corvinus. She proclaimed, "Very well done, the both of you. Congratulations." Pride swelled in Abby's chest. There might be hundreds, thousands of questions she had about her new homeland, but this all felt so right. She needed to be here. This was where she belonged. It was clearer now to her than it had been since she had first stepped through that door at the abandoned mill office. She heard a cough like someone clearing their throat, and out of the corner of her eye, Abby spied another young man who stood at the edge of the clearing, who peered at a pocket watch. He spoke in a nasal, pinched voice. "My lady, you are about to be late for your meeting with Sentinel Brainerd." "Right." Laura started, sighing. "You will have to forgive me, you two. But duty, as always, calls. We shall speak later. For now, on to your studies." She walked over to the man, looked back with a weak but reassuring smile, and left the clearing with him. "That's Master Zagwan. He's the headmistress's personal assistant," Renard said as Abby turned to look at him again. He was a good head taller than her. Most people at the academy seemed to be, really. Headmistress Corvinus loves teaching and being part of her students' lives. But there is so much that a headmistress must take care of, that she rarely gets to teach anymore. Master Zagwan is pretty much the only one who keeps her on track with her duties. "Why not step down and return to teaching?" Abby asked. She found herself fixated on the man's eyes. They were purple after all. Pale, almost blue, but she could see it. They certainly were unmistakably purple once you got close enough. That wasn't the only curious thing about him, though. She noticed that his pale skin actually had a greenish hue to it. His blonde hair even had a touch of green. What little of it peeked from under his head wrap that was some of the same embroidered silk pattern that his coat was made of. He shrugged. "I've asked that myself. It really is where her passion lies. I'm sure it is a political move more than anything. There's a lot of people who feel the elementalists, the Academy, and Avalon in general should be operated in different ways, so on and so forth. And she seems to be the only figure respected by all the different sides in our order, so she kind of keeps things together. Of course, they forget that even a headmaster has to work with the other two orders, and that at the end of the day, the three goddesses are the ultimate authority." Renard sighed, then chuckled. "But, hey, that's me trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about with regards to politics. Your keeper will probably be able to tell you a lot more about that since they are directly involved in that kind of stuff. Who did the headmistress bring you to, by the way?"
"Willa?"
Abby replied. Memories of that incredible feast the woman, who was more whirlwind than human, had made for breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, cheese. It felt almost sinful to think how luxuriously she had eaten. "Really?" Renard's pale eyebrows raised. "She's a wild one, that Willa, but she's amazing. She'll make sure that you will want for nothing, though you'll likely have to work hard for it. I've also heard Willa's quite the tutor if you need more help in your lessons, though, again, you'll have to work to pay her back." "I'll take hard work over starving like I used to any day." Will had asked Abby to scrub the kitchen floor after she had eaten. She would have cleaned every floor in the house just to have that breakfast again. Renard smirked. "Well said." Abby smiled back. "So, what now?" "Ah, right. You don't really know how things work here. How long have you been here in Avalon?" Renard asked, a fresh breeze pushing through the clearing. "Yesterday morning, actually," Abby said casually. Renard's head tilted to the side, Curious. And you had no knowledge of magic before you came here?
It's certainly not magic like this, she said, gesturing around herself.
And yet you passed the test. You must learn quickly. He nodded, obviously brimming with thoughts and questions, not too unlike herself, if only from the opposite perspective. Renard spoke in a steady tone, pausing at each major point, probably in order to make sure she understood what he was saying. Well, there are 9 ranks, or classes, at the Academy. These are subdivided into 3 grades. The first is the Apprentice grade, which comprises Initiate, Apprentice, and Senior Apprentice classes. The next grade is that of Scholar, and has the classes Junior Scholar, Scholar, and Senior Scholar. Then there is Magus grade, which covers Magus, Master, and Grand Master classes. Though it should be noted that most students at the Academy graduate and choose to pursue other paths in life once they reach the level of Magus.
Why is that? Abby asked.
Each class before Master class may take a year, perhaps 2 or 3, to test into the next class. But Master and Grand Master is a level of understanding and skill that very few will ever achieve or even seek to. It may take a decade or more of hard work and study for a Magus to grow to the class of Master, and even longer for Grand Master. Renard cleared his throat after the last point.
Abby thought for a moment, then said, So each class has a test to determine if you are ready for the next level?
Renard smirked. Exactly right. Very astute. As an initiate, your test to reach apprentice is to forge your own fulcrum. But we will talk more on that subject later. For now, let's take a walk. Today will mostly be about learning more of each other. A truly beneficial apprenticeship starts from a place of respect and understanding, he said as he started to walk out of the clearing.
Abigail followed shortly behind. Renard's pace was much more leisurely and comfortable to keep up with than Willa's or Lauren's, even with his longer legs. He looked back and waited for her to walk next to him, as opposed to behind him.
I am your mentor, not a professor or a master. We are here to learn together.
How does that work exactly? She asked as Abby took her spot next to him.
Elementalists take a hybrid approach to learning. We have regular lecture hall style courses that everyone of the same level must take. You'll see both scholars and magi teaching the initiate courses. I myself have to prepare a lecture on Arcane history next month for the initiate class. This is supplemented and expanded by our apprenticeship program, where scholars and above take on apprentices to help guide and foster growth outside of regular coursework. This gives each student special attention to ensure that they are truly grasping their studies and expanding their lessons beyond the classroom. It is wildly beneficial for the learning of both the understudy and the mentor, Renard said.
Abby looked back to him with a somewhat puzzled expression. But you are a higher rank than me. What would you have to learn from me?
See, that's just it. Scholars learn just as much by teaching as studying. When you reach a certain level of understanding, your next step to learning is passing that knowledge on. You'd be surprised how much you learn just by thinking of how you would explain what you know, or think you know, to others. Renard cleared his throat, then continued. Even more surprising are the insights that can be learned from those you teach. I helped Scholar Melania better understand fire magic, since I have an affinity for it. She could barely keep a fireball together, whereas I don't even have to concentrate that hard to do it.
Affinity? Like a talent? Abby asked. There seemed to be something more to that word, but she wasn't sure.
Renard shrugged. That's not a bad way of thinking about it. I'm sure the headmistress explained what the sphere test was for.
Actually, she didn't. Willa told me later, though. Something about finding out what kind of magic you can do, or how you learn? Abby said as a particularly powerful gust of wind pushed past, flinging her dark, curly hair about erratically. Willa had cut it to chin length the night before, grumbling about how disappointed she was that she couldn't save more.
Basically, yes, but it also shows your affinity.
what element you are most deeply connected to. Sure, you might be an elementalist, or naturally inclined towards spiritual connection to the elements. However, not even all elementalists have the same natural drive or disposition. He stopped walking and turned to face Abigail directly. What did you see in the sphere? What did you put into it? It looked like a swirling storm, a cyclone. She looked down at her feet, somewhat embarrassed. For some reason, it felt like change. Intriguing that you intuitively made that correlation. Most don't fully realize that till they reach apprentice level. Well, it is just that, Renard said, which made Abby's eyes snap back to his. Wind, and storms in general, are the essence of change, metaphysically speaking. You have somewhat of a rare affinity, Abigail. It isn't unheard of, mind you, just not commonplace. Renard looked out at the rolling grassy hills. Change is so easily brought to peace, which is the realm of water, or sparked into desire, which is the realm of lightning. Those with a true wind affinity are by nature adaptable, quick to recover when beaten down, or come at a problem from a different angle when stumped. They push forward, even when they may be unsure of where they are going. He smirked, looking back to her. Sound familiar? Abby gave a shy smile in response, demurely bowing her head. I thought you might. Honestly explains why you were so quick to master the test. Though passing on your first try is still virtually unheard of. He began walking again. Well, Abigail, why don't you come with me and I'll show you about the campus as we talk. Oh, you can just call me Abby. Only my mom and dad called me Abigail, and that was only when I was in trouble, Abby said as she followed. Happy it is then, Renard said with a smile. What about your parents then? Where are they? Abigail's heart dropped, as if thrown from a cliff. She took a deep breath to steady herself, then replied, I'd rather not talk about it. Renard looked back to her, and she could see understanding grow in his eyes. Then, pain. He nodded. No wonder she wanted you to be my apprentice. It seemed unwise for her to push any further, as much as she wanted to. She knew the pain she had seen in his eyes. They didn't need to speak aloud. Sometimes a single look said more than a bucket of words. They kept walking through the endless rolling hills, the wind coursing through the emerald blades of grass as the morning grew to early midday.
Number 6. The Assignment. Garrett.
All right, cadets, your assignment due to me next week is to partner up with the fellow cadet and pick one of the ruins here at Avalon to investigate and learn more about. Put together a report of your findings and have it on my desk by the start of class Monday, said Captain Capulet, a petite woman old enough to be Garrett's grandmother, who had to stand on a stool for her face and massive mop of wiry gray hair to be seen over the lectern at the front of class. Now remember, I really want you to dig deep. There's 2 of you working together. That means you can do twice the work. I really want to see some intriguing findings. Understood? The third-year cadet said in near unison.
Yes, Captain.
Very well. Figure out who you are going to partner up with. Class is adjourned. At that, she hit a small steel hammer on the lectern and started to walk out of the lecture hall. The various cadets broke into small packs, figuring out whom they would pair up with. Some of the third years were much more popular than others, so there was a bit of a fight over who would get the privilege of working with them. Garrett glanced over to where Tabitha sat at the other corner of the classroom, but he couldn't see her. She'd probably already been snatched up by one of her friends. He sighed. What else did he expect? Garrett stayed in his seat and looked over a map of the island. Captain Capulet had said the first voyagers had described the island as vaguely triangular, which he could see what they meant. While the edges of the island organically carved a shoreline of cliffs,
and what had once been beaches, the general shape of the land was that of an equilateral triangle, the markings of ancient ruin sites, a rough arch-shaped symbol, sat at each one of the points, marking the outer reaches of the island. Garrett had read about them before. They were called the Three Sisters or the Three Towers. Something about seeing them on the map piqued his interest. The number 3 was incredibly important in Avalon. There were the 3 goddesses, the 3 kinds of magic, 3 lakes, though 2 were much less prominent than the other 2. But when it came to the buildings, they were rarely built in 3s, so usually, when there was, it was something rather important.
"All right, Gary, don't worry. I'll be your partner," said Lucas in a consoling tone as he came to sit beside him. He turned to look at Lucas. "Who else will want to?"
"Actually, if it's alright, could I be your partner, Garrett?" came the unmistakable, sweet, melodic voice of Tabitha. His heart started pounding in his chest at the sound. He whipped his head around, and there she stood, wearing the crisp gray uniform of the Stellarians, with a magenta baldric and half cape. Garrett's jaw dropped. From beside him, he heard Lucas say, "Jesus Christ!" Garrett looked over and saw a look of utter bewilderment on Lucas's face, probably for the first time since the two had met. His own expression was probably much the same. It took him a moment, but Garrett finally managed, It would be my honor." She smiled one of those bright, almost blinding smiles. "Great. Why don't we go to the archives and figure out what we want to do our report on?" Tabitha nodded to the door out of the fine wooden lecture hall. Garrett scrambled to pick up his bag, to which Tabitha giggled as she walked to the door. Her long platinum blonde hair was bound up in a tasteful bun to keep it from touching her uniform's collar, per regulation. He got up to follow her. As Garrett closed the door of the lecture hall behind him, he heard Lucas breathe, "Holy smokes, what the heck just happened?" Tabitha waited for him in the hallway, grinning as he came through the door. "I think we gave your friend quite the shock." I'd say so," Garrett said, laughing nervously. Me too, if I'm honest." "Really?" she giggled. "And here I was thinking after our chat last night we'd at least be friends." Garrett coughed. We are." Tabitha giggled again, covering her mouth with one of her slender hands. "3 keep me, but you are too easy to tease." Sorry," he said, casting his eyes to his boots. She bumped him playfully, making him jump in surprise. "Relax. It's a good thing. Now, why don't we get going? The archives aren't going to read themselves." They started walking down the hallway. A few other pairs had already set out for the same destination, or were discussing things in the hallway. Garrett hardly paid them any mind. He was laser focused on keeping a respectful distance from Tabitha. Too close and he might seem overeager or disrespectful of her personal space, but too far and he might seem, well, he didn't want to be far from her at all. Tabitha looked over to him as they stepped through the door to the outside. He, of course, had scrambled to open the door for her. She smirked. "Such a gentleman." And as she passed by him, she hooked an arm through his and yanked him next to her. Garrett panicked, his heart pounding in his chest. Somehow he was still walking in time with her, and not a bundle of nerves on the ground. He looked down to her head, which only came up to his chin, and she turned her head to look at him with one of those magnificent smiles. She asked, "So, did you have any ruins in mind?" Ruins?" he started. His thinking brain was miles away. Any chance of sounding intelligent had fled with it. She was so close, literally touching him. Forgot about our assignment already? He could see her fight back a laugh. Oh! Garrett shook his head as if snapping out of a trance. Well, I was looking at that map of the ruin sites that the captain gave us. Have you ever heard of the Three Sisters? Tabitha smiled. Of course I have. My mom told me about them as a kid. Most children raised on the island probably heard the same story. They took a turn down Aquinas Street. Several groups of students of the three different uniform types at Avalon Academy went to and fro. Most of the professors had offices on this street as it was central to the three main lecture halls. Oh, I guess I never realized you were native, Garrett said. Born and raised, she said softly. My mom and dad have a bookshop over on Lakeside. Garrett blinked. You mean your parents own curios and tomes? You know it. Tabitha looked up to him curiously. Well, yeah, I kind of stumbled in there when I was a first year. Couldn't believe all the stuff they had in there. Garrett smiled. It kind of became my home away from home. If I was stuck on a lesson or needed somewhere to think, I'd go there and would find a new book. It always seemed to snap me out of whatever funk I was in. She smiled back. It does kind of have that effect, doesn't it? But wait, if your parents own the shop, why would you work at the Starlight Cafe? Tabitha nodded and sighed. Something in her eyes told Garrett that she was reluctant to answer the question. After a moment, he said nervously, Sorry, you don't... She shook her head and cleared her throat. They just kept walking like nothing had happened, though it seemed like her grip on his arm had loosened. Garrett couldn't believe he had messed up something that had been going so well. His mind flooded with ways to try and fix it, but none of them seemed to make sense. He'd just make things worse, like he always did. They came to the multi-tiered, pyramid-shaped Avalon Archives building. As Captain Capulet had taught in the class that day, this was not the original archive, as the first archive had been a cavern as old as the Cave of Founding, but it had collapsed in the early Renaissance period. On the original site, Master Devona built the archives that stood to this day out of local limestone. It took several sessions of casting, but he managed to construct the pyramid in a week. It was not a massive building. In fact, it was several stories shorter than the central clock tower. But it reached deep underground, making it the largest structure on campus. Almost half of the campus had chambers of the archives deep underneath the ground. Garrett opened one of the two heavy oak doors at the front entrance, and Tabitha walked through with a smile. An elderly woman with pristine white robes stepped up to them as they entered. More here for Captain Capulet's assignment, yes? Yes, ma'am, Garrett said. Very good, she said with what looked to be a smile, but the expressions on her aged face were so slight that it was hard to tell. You'll want to go down to the 6th level and take a left to the archaeology section to start. The historical records on the 29th level may also be useful. Should you have any questions, you can ask one of the librarians on that floor. Anything else? Tabitha spoke this time. No, Lady Wainwright. Thank you. The elderly woman nodded her head and headed back to her desk. Good luck, you two. Tabitha pulled Garrett along to the lifts just behind the desk. There were 4 here, though if Garrett remembered correctly, there were more scattered throughout in other sections of the archive. They stepped into the open lift waiting for them and started going down to the 6th floor. Through the brass bars of the lift, he could see a labyrinth of bookshelves, desks, and other features weave and span across the different wide open floors as they went. He looked at Tabitha, and before he could stop himself, he said, "I'm sorry about what I asked before." "No, it's all right." The tone in her voice indicated it wasn't. "It was my choice to leave. We had an argument back when I was a first year. I took a job at Starlight to prove a point. Came to find that I really liked it there, so I stayed. That's why I live in the dormitory too." "I shouldn't have brought it up. Garrett started. "Hush." She put her left index finger on his rambling lips. A jolt shot through his spine at the intimate touch, as if he had been struck by lightning. "It's okay. It's something we would have talked about eventually anyway." A single word caught his attention. Eventually? Tabitha giggled, probably at some dumb look on his face. "Well, yes. Did you think this would be the last time we spoke or something?" "Well," Garrett scratched his head. "I mean, it's me." "Exactly. It is you." A strange, inexplicable look warmed Tabitha's features as they stepped off the lift that sent his already pounding heart beating at a reckless pace. "And that's why I want to." Garrett looked down at his booted feet on the cherry wood floor. "I don't get it." Tabitha laughed and lifted his head with a finger to the chin. "You will," and then kissed him on the cheek. Garrett's soul could have left his body in that moment, and he could have died without a regret in his heart. Somehow he didn't die. Somehow this moment wasn't some freak hallucination. He felt her grab his hand and pull him forward. "Come on, Garrett. We should get some things done before I have to go to work this evening. You'll be there, won't you?" Garrett grinned. "Of course I will."
Number 7. Letting Go. Ravi.
Remember, Ravi, try to think of the most important thing to you and put it in that sphere,
Headmaster Ferris said through his great salt and pepper beard. Ravi took the sphere in both hands, nodding silently as he tried to calm his mind. Doubt lingered as he took a deep breath. He shook his head, trying to clear it away as if it were a fly in his face. Yet, just like a fly, it whizzed and buzzed about his mind, clawing away at him. He had to focus. But he was going to fail. He needed to pass the test. But he wouldn't. He didn't know if he could take the embarrassment of failing again. But he would have to. He just wanted to join his friends who had already passed. But he wouldn't. Aggravated, Ravi growled, almost throwing the delicate glass sphere on the ground. He looked up to the headmaster, who raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Then he looked back to the sphere. He'd fail, just like he had every time before. He'd fail, and he'd have to tell Edgar, Nessa, and Francois that he failed again. Failed again. Failure.
I'm sorry, Ravi, but you have failed the test,
the headmaster said, with his hands held out to take the sphere. Ravi bowed his head in shame. "Yes, the headmaster." He handed the sphere over.
"Don't worry, you will get it. Sometimes it just takes time,"
the bearded man said as he placed the sphere in a fine wooden box. "It's been 2 years, headmaster. I don't deserve to be here," Ravi said, looking away.
"Nonsense,"
Headmaster Ferris started.
I've seen more than a few that have taken much longer, and went on to be fantastic students. Just focus on your lessons. Remember the breathing techniques we worked on before? In through your nose, out through your mouth, he recited with a sigh. The headmaster smirked. That's it, Ravi. Just keep practicing, and we'll try again next week, alright? Ravi just nodded and walked away. A long line of hopefuls stood behind him, waiting for their turn. Some would probably pass today. Others would be stuck, just like he was. He opened the door to the Cave of Founding, or the Cave as the offices of the headmasters at the academy was called for short. He'd read in The Voyage Beyond that it was the cave where the first voyagers first made contact with the three goddesses. For Ravi, it had been nothing but a cave of disappointment. Every Friday for the last 2 years, he had come to test with the sphere. Every Friday, he had failed. 3 months after he came to Avalon, Francois had been the first of his friends he had made since coming to Avalon, who passed and joined the Stellarians. He was already a second-year cadet. Then Edgar passed, joining the Arcanists. He was still in the First Order, but Ravi had heard that it took a long time for Arcanists to rank up. Last year, on New Year's Day, Nessa joined the Elementalists. She had just earned the rank of apprentice last week. They were not alone. All of Ravi's friends had ended up passing. Misha, Diego, Victor, Chris, even 7-year-old Kayla Wainwright, half his age, had passed the test in her first month of training. Then there was Ravi Das, the kid who couldn't pass. The Chronicles of the Sphere told that Franco Villa had the record for the longest time to pass the test. 10 years. Franco had been 5 when he started. At the pace Ravi was going, he was very likely to break that record. He hadn't paid attention to where he was going, just walking where his feet would take him, but the sharp scent of coffee caught Ravi's nose, making him look around. He was on Da Vinci Street, where several student laboratories and workshops were. Ravi had watched Nessa forge her fulcrum at the blacksmith shop at the other end of the street. He'd hoped the important moment would have given him some insight, inspiration. Instead, seeing her triumph just made him feel worse. The world was leaving him behind, and there was nothing he could do about it. Shaking his head, he sighed and turned to leave when he saw a middle-aged woman with amber skin and charcoal-colored hair that was tied back with a red ribbon. She was placing a sidewalk sign that held a blackboard with something written on it in white chalk. But Ravi didn't get a chance to read it before he saw the woman turn her head toward him and smile. "Looks like you could use a good cup of coffee," she said in an accent he recognized but couldn't quite put his finger on. Ravi smiled back nervously. She waved towards the door. "That's not a no. Come on then. I've got a Lemurian peaberry blend that'll really get you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for the rest of the day." Ravi looked to where she had gestured and found a brown brick building with a large glass window that had the word Tachibana-ya painted across it. A simple coffee cup silhouette was painted just beneath. "I should probably," he started. "Better to mope with some good coffee than without, I always say." The woman beamed. "I'm not moping," Ravi growled. The woman laughed and winked. "Sounds exactly like someone who's moping would say." Baffled, Ravi cocked his head to the side, unable to think of another protest. He sighed and shrugged. "I guess I could use a cup." "Just like I thought." She opened the full glass front door and swept her free hand towards the threshold with a dramatic gesture. "Come on then." Ravi did so,
and as he stepped through the door, the scent of coffee he had picked up on before returned, joined by freshly baked bread, tea, and a symphony of other smells that filled his nose. He felt his apprehension melt somewhat. The shop had a warm and inviting atmosphere with cozy furniture and what must have been 1,000 books and other artifacts in dark wooden bookshelves all around the walls of the space. He looked at some of the titles on the closest books: Theory of Forms by Corian, Phoenix Current by Suzaku Mikami, Fallen by the Sword by Anders Wayne, and Whispers of the Three by Liana Gawain. The last was familiar to him, as he had read it a few months ago, hoping Master Liana's research into the three goddesses would help him better understand the test. It hadn't. The others were totally new to him. As someone who spent more time in libraries and bookshops than he did nearly anywhere else, finding a book he hadn't even heard about more than piqued his interest. On the other side of the room was a dark granite bar, where the woman stood, pouring a gooseneck kettle of steaming hot water over a kind of upside-down glass bell device. As he drew closer, Ravi noticed there were coffee grounds and a filter in the top end of the bell, where she was pouring the water. I have to keep the water exactly 204.33 degrees Fahrenheit to bring out the best from Lemurian peaberry. Even a fraction higher, you scorch the delicate bouquet. Any lower, and the full flavor will remain hidden, the woman said, her eyes alight with wonder as she poured. A thick brown foam bloomed from the fine grounds as the water churned the coffee into life. Underneath, abyssal black liquid dripped from the filter to the bottom, a kind of reservoir for the brewed coffee, he supposed. I didn't know there was a coffee shop on this street, Ravi said as he came to sit at the bar on a surprisingly comfortable stool. The woman smirked. We get that a lot. She brought the kettle down to rest on the counter and let the water percolate from the top of the glass bell to the bottom. Her lips seemed to be silently counting as she set an empty white mug in front of him. Then he saw her mouth 0, and she waved a hand over the mug as the last drip from the filter fell. The woman's hand moved away, and the mug was full of obsidian black liquid. Astonished, Ravi looked back to the bell, and the gathered coffee at the bottom was gone. You can do magic? Is there anyone who cannot? She said. Her skilled hand set about cleaning the bell, tossing the spent grounds and filter into an unseen bin, and rinsing the bell out. Right. Dumb question, Ravi grumbled. She laughed heartily at that. Oh dear, a question is not dumb. Questions, in the right hands, are the tools of those who seek to be less dumb. Ravi blinked, unsure if he should take it as a compliment or an insult. It didn't really matter either way. He decided he needed to try the coffee and brought the mug to his lips. A surge of bittersweet chocolate notes thundered into his taste buds, followed by a cold splash of citrus that seemed to come out of nowhere. Then a riot of floral and spice notes danced about his mouth, almost overwhelming him, before giving way to a warm honey finish. He was taken aback for a moment, staring at the coffee in the mug as if it was some unknown creature. The woman laughed, covering her mouth. I was waiting for that face. Gets people every time. Words? Whoa, what were the words? Never tasted anything like that. Ravi was sure his expression was that of utter shock. Nor will you likely ever anywhere else. I have a very discreet supplier, she said with a smirk. Ravi just shook his head. Where does this even come from? Oh, worlds away, darling. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, she said. He nodded and took another sip. The sensation was enough to give him goosebumps. I realize I've been a bit rude in not introducing myself. My name is Keiko Tachibana, and this is my shop, Keiko said, with just about the biggest smile
on her face that he thought he'd ever seen on anyone. He held out his right hand. Ravi Das. She took his hand and shook it. So you're a student, yes? No, well... He scratched his head. I've been trying to pass the test and I just can't do it. Can't or just haven't yet? Keiko said, a shadow of a smile creeping up her lips. Can't. I've been trying. Every time I try, I just fail. Ravi lowered his head. It's been 2 years. I might as well just give up, she suggested. Keiko's expression was unreadable. He met her dark brown eyes for a moment, sighed, and looked down again. I'm just tired of failing. Keiko snickered and started working on something where he couldn't see. Have you ever tried making bread? What? Ravi asked, confused as he looked back to her. You know, bread. Have you ever tried making it? Well, no. Why do you ask? Ravi asked. He was unsure why she had so abruptly changed the subject. Today's your lucky day, she said as she put a large metal bowl and some kind of machine on the bar. Then, next to these, she placed a burlap sack. Puzzled, Ravi looked at the items, then back to Keiko. But how? Just humor me for a bit. You'll get some lovely bread out of it. Besides... Wasn't I right about the coffee? She interrupted. Ravi rolled his eyes. She had been right about the coffee. But him making bread? He'd never really understood cooking. Everything he ever made just ended up tasting like mud. Or nothing at all. But once again, he couldn't really think of an excuse to refuse. And so he stood up and walked around the end of the bar, over to where she stood. She had an irritatingly large smile as he did so. Now, the first secret to making fantastic bread is to start with whole wheat berries and mill them yourself. She opened the sack and Ravi saw hundreds of little nuts or seed-like pods. They didn't look much like berries to him. Picking up the sack, she poured some into the open bin at the top of the machine he had seen before and placed a lid on top. With the flip of a switch, the machine whirred, and in a matter of minutes, she opened a bin at the bottom of the machine, and there was a pile of soft white flour. Ravi blinked in surprise. I guess I never knew that those were what made flour. Everything must come from somewhere, young man. She poured the flour into a bowl, along with a few other ingredients. One of them looked like honey, followed by salt and water. With a few others he couldn't identify. Those wheat berries came from dozens, hundreds of wheat plants, which themselves came from the seed, the ground, water, and the sun. Those all came from other places as well, even something as seemingly perennial as the sun. He watched her mix the ingredients until they combined into a somewhat sticky dough. She turned it out on the counter, having scattered more flour on the surface before she did. Then she started working it with her hands, pushing and pulling the dough in a specific pattern. Keiko looked to him from the corner of her eye. You know, some will say just to have a machine mix the dough till it's ready. Others say just mix it with your hands. Which is the right way? Ravi asked, mesmerized seeing her skilled hands at work. There was an indescribable art and flow to her movements. Sure, it was just mixing the ingredients together, but there was a kind of ceremony to how she worked. Keiko smirked. You see, that's the thing. You kind of have to figure out the right way yourself. Sure, there may be a textbook answer, but baking is as much an art as it is a science. You can try and learn it through a book, but nothing beats actually trying it and feeling what is right yourself. She then turned to Ravi and said, All right, I want you to try kneading the dough like you saw me do it. Wait, what? Trust me, just give it a try, Keiko said with that unreadable expression on her face again. Ravi hesitated, reached for the dough, then stopped himself again. But what if I mess it up? Maybe you will, and maybe you won't. But you certainly will if you do nothing. She tilted her head to the side. So, You might as well try, right? With that, Ravi reached out and put his hands on the still somewhat sticky dough. He thought back to what she had done. It looked like she had cupped her hands and rolled the dough. He tried to imitate the movement, inelegant as a bird learning to fly compared to her mastery. She even gestured the technique with her hands in the air to help. It was awkward at first. He'd never really done anything like it, but eventually he had it moving somewhat like she had. It was a cheap imitation, but she nodded encouragingly, so he must have been doing something right. A few moments later, the texture of the dough changed. What before had felt like a loose, sticky blob of mush started to feel somewhat like a ball of clay. "Very well done, young man," Keiko said, making Ravi turn to look at her smiling face. The approving look in her eyes made him blush in embarrassment. They put the dough ball back in the bowl and covered it with a moist towel. She explained it was to bulk the dough, something he had never heard before. Keiko showed him some of the books and artifacts that the shelves held while they waited. There were so many books he had never even heard of before. Ravi found himself making a mental list of ones he wanted to read later. After about an hour, they did what she called shaping. This consisted of him rolling the dough, which had grown almost twice the size it was before they set it aside, and into a kind of log shape. Keiko had him place it in a rectangular pan, then she said that it needed to proof. Whatever that meant. Another customer came in at that point. Keiko beamed with a smile brighter than the sun itself and welcomed her inside. It was a girl in an unfamiliar blue, green, and white uniform with red hair who stumbled, almost falling flat on her face before she caught herself as she sprinted up to the counter. Ravi couldn't see anything that she could have possibly tripped on in the smooth, dark wood plank flooring. "Miss Tachibana, you won't believe what I got on my statistics exam. 94! The girl said excitedly. "I don't know how I could have done it without your help." Keiko laughed and waved in the air dismissively. "Oh, nonsense, Cora. Sometimes people just need to see things from a different perspective. You earned that score, sweetheart." The girl, apparently named Cora, grinned. "Alright, we'll settle this tonight after my last class. For now, I need to get to Brit Lit. See ya," she said before bolting to the door and exiting nearly as quickly as she came. Keiko laughed again, shaking her head. "That girl. So much energy. You wouldn't have guessed she had it in her when she first stumbled in that door. Well, over the sign out front, rather." Ravi sat with his cup of coffee and thought for a while as Keiko went about other business around the shop. He really didn't know what she was doing. A bit later, they checked on the dough and she said it was ready to bake. She made a few cuts on the top with a razor blade, brushed on something over the top of the dough, and then they put it in the oven, and it was time to wait. Keiko suggested a book for him to read as the bread baked, a novella called Letting Go by Suzaku Mikami. It was an author he was unfamiliar with. The book was a kind of philosophical narrative about an unnamed man whose anxiety over his own mortality had paralyzed him. His fear became so overwhelming that he started to develop powers that let him see a day into the future to see if he would die. But this power only drove him deeper into anxiety. Even knowing he wouldn't die the next day, he was consumed by the mistakes and choices he was fated to make. He lost his job, his home, even his girlfriend. Eventually, he saw his meeting with death the next day. Strangely, the man felt a kind of peace. His anxiety at the possibility of this event had unraveled with the knowledge that he would soon meet his end. He began looking back with regret at all the time he wasted worrying about his death, and was ashamed. When death came to him, it asked if he could do something differently. What would it be? To which he replied, "I'd have lived each day without the fear of what's to come and what cannot be stopped. To this, Death smiled and said, "Then take this lesson and move forward without fear." He left without the man, and the man went on to reclaim the life his fear had taken from him. Ravi sat, lost in thought about the story as he took his last sip of the amazing coffee. And then he heard, "Well then, how would you like to try some of the bread you worked on?" It was Keiko holding out a steaming slice of crusty bread. He eagerly accepted it. He hadn't realized until that moment, but he had grown quite hungry as the scent of the baking bread had filled the shop. Keiko had even put a thick pat of quickly melting butter on the spongy, impressively warm piece of bread. Ravi took a bite and couldn't believe how good the taste was. It was as if he had never really had bread before. He noticed that she was watching him. "What, do I have a weird look on my face?" "Not more so than usual," Keiko replied with a smirk. "It's good. Like, really good." "Of course. You have to make it," Keiko said. She went behind the counter again and started working on something, but he couldn't see what it was. Ravi stared at the older woman for a while, watching her work. He hadn't noticed before, but there were faint traces of gray in her thick black hair. "Why did you have me help you? Why bread?" "Would you have preferred I had you clean a toilet? I thought the bread would at least taste better," Keiko said, meeting his eyes with a mischievous grin. He shook his head in disbelief. "I'll never get a straight answer out of you, will I?" Keiko laughed, probably too hard at something he didn't really think was funny to begin with. "What use are straight answers when the one who asks the question has already made up their mind?" "Why would someone ask a question if the—" Ravi started. Then something clicked into place in his head. This is about the test, isn't it?" Keiko leaned against the counter. "It is hard to be open and show an earnest part of yourself when you are determined not to." "I'm not Ravi choked the thought off and took a moment to really think about what she was saying. "Does it make sense now?" Keiko asked. Ravi nodded his head slowly. "It isn't a test about what you can do. It's a test about who I am." Keiko grinned. "Bingo!" and went back to whatever she was doing. "So, the only reason I've been failing is because I've closed myself off? I put up barriers around myself because I was so afraid of failing," Ravi said quietly to himself. "Just like someone you read about," she finished, her grin only growing. Ravi stared at the woman, bewildered. "Who are you?" She laughed and replied with, unbelievably, an even bigger grin on her face. "Keiko Tachibana, mother, wife, coffee shop owner, baker, fantastic chess player, part-time paranormal investigator, and occasional life advice giver. I'm really happy I met you," Ravi found himself saying. He really meant it too. As strange as the entire encounter had been, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a critically important friend. "Same here, young man. Now, I think there's somewhere you need to be, isn't there?" Ravi pulled out his pocket watch and was surprised to see it was almost lunchtime. No wonder he had grown so hungry. He had promised Nessa that he'd meet her today. "You're right. Wait, how did you know that?" Keiko giggled and handed him something wrapped in a soft white towel. "I have my ways." "What's this?" Ravi said, taking the thing and looking it over. "I told you you'd get some delicious bread. Why not show her what you made?" Keiko said with that unreadable expression again. "But I did part of this. Most of this was your work," Ravi said. Keiko shrugged and giggled. We all have to start somewhere. Now get out of here." "Wait, what do I owe you?" With, perhaps, the warmest smile Ravi had ever seen, Keiko replied, "Just don't be a stranger, and we'll call it even today." Ravi was about to protest, but if there was one thing he had learned in the past few hours, it was that there was no arguing with this woman. So he just said, "Deal. I'll be back tomorrow," and made his way out of the shop.
Number 8. Catching Up. Abigail.
"Good morning, Abby,"
came Renard's voice from the door to the kitchen at Willa's place. Abby's head shot up from her plate of pancakes with a wide smile.
"Oh, good morning, Renard. What are you doing here?"
Thankfully, she hadn't been mid-bite when he entered.
"I spoke with your instructors last night, and they agreed with me that it would be prudent if we took today to help catch you up to speed with where your class is at right now. Help you get a jump start."
He came to sit across the table from Abby, smirking when he saw the wonderful stack of pancakes in front of her.
"Willa's famous pancakes? Hoping you aren't expecting any for yourself, young man,"
Willa said from the stove, a flurry of work and industry as she readied breakfast for the other residents. Renard chuckled.
"Oh, worry not, ma'am. I ate before I came. I wouldn't dream of imposing."
"Such a terrible liar," Willa said, whipping around and setting a plate in front of Renard before flipping 3 pancakes on it.
"The herb garden needs weeding when you get a chance."
Renard shook his head with a massive grin on his face.
"Today will not be a lucky day to be a weed in your garden, dear Willa. You are far too kind."
Willa went back to her work and soon had put together breakfast for the other students who stayed at the house. Abby hadn't really met any of them. There were about a dozen of them in all, different ages, some girls, some boys, and different ranks. Willa had said the eldest, Martina, had been looking for her own place. She looked back over to Renard, who was savoring his first bite of pancake. Abby imagined her face looked much the same as his expression of pure elation. She had helped Willa with making the batter that morning, something she said she had never done, and expected Abby to keep her mouth shut on the recipe. Honey, yogurt, coconut milk, and an extra egg, she said, were the secret, as well as leaving the batter to rest before cooking. Abby felt so honored to have been trusted with the knowledge, especially after hearing how coveted her recipe was from the other students.
"I don't know where that woman learned to cook, but I can tell you I want to go study there,"
Renard said between mouthfuls. Abby looked back to her own pancakes, cutting a new piece as she said, "Do you cook?"
"I took it up at my master's suggestion when I was having trouble with magic other than fire. Scholar Melania made the point that something about the creative outlet and using different ingredients to make different things has a way of opening one up to other ways of thinking."
Renard took another bite and swallowed before continuing.
"Every dish has a kind of ethos. A stew operates by different rules and philosophies than, say, smoking meats or baking bread. Even different stews have different concepts, rules, and processes to follow."
"Did it work?" Abby asked.
Renard smiled. "Yes, actually. Now whenever I feel stuck with a spell or something, I find a new recipe to try, and somehow things seem to start making sense. And usually I get to taste something new."
Abby raised an eyebrow. "Usually?"
"Well,"
he laughed.
"There have been some complete failures, if I'm honest, either through my poor execution or the ill intent by the person who wrote the recipe. Whoever decided to commit the recipe for smoked asparagus to paper must have been a truly diabolical malefactor indeed."
They laughed together. Abby couldn't imagine what that would have tasted like, but took the utter revulsion on Renard's face when he said it as more than enough to tell that it must have been quite vile. After they had breakfast and helped Willa clean up the kitchen,
Bernard and Abby set out through the rolling grassy hills outside of campus. The wind seemed a bit calmer today, with a slight chill that nipped at her nose and ears. A question came to Abby as they walked. Bernard, I never really asked, where is this exactly?
North Central Avalon?
He suggested. She laughed. No, I mean, where is Avalon? During the initiation, you said that this land was connected to all times and places? Does that mean we are outside of... well... The thought died on Abby's lips as she realized that she wasn't even sure what she was asking. Bernard turned and nodded with a knowing look on his face.
Almost there. This is something usually that isn't explored until apprentice class, but I think you'll be able to grasp it.
He gestured a spherical shape with his hands.
Avalon is a physical place on Earth, but its location is not fixed. When the first voyagers came to this land, it was close to ancient Sumeria. They sailed to it on boats, finding their way through the guiding hand of the three goddesses. They soon realized, however, that it would move on its own. Sometimes it would shift position in the sea, or would pick up and fly to a different place altogether.
He looked to his pocket watch for a moment, considering.
Right now she is over the Pacific Ocean, somewhere near the Aleutian Islands.
Wait, really? Abby said, wondering what he saw in the pocket watch since all she could see was its brass case from where she stood.
Quite so. I'm sure you've noticed how much cooler the air is today.
He started, walking through the endless blades of grass again.
Avalon roughly circumnavigates the globe every 160 to 210 days. The path she takes shifts and diverges over time, following the currents of magic.
Abby found that somewhat difficult to believe. More so than, well, magic being real, and being able to step through doorways to magical floating islands. If that's true, how come people don't see Avalon all the time? Why aren't sightings a regular occurrence?
Bernard grinned. Good observation. In ancient times, a moving or even flying island could rather easily escape scrutiny. Though you will find stories about a lost, moving, or floating island in nearly every culture. With how widespread and populous mankind is now, the three thought it best to disguise the island. Sometimes it will be as a cloud, or the island will curtain the land in a dense fog, and so on. More recently, she has started taking the shape of a large, ornate airship. To be honest, I'm not sure if that is more or less conspicuous than a floating landmass in the sky.
Abby giggled, shrugging. Can't say so either.
Even though the island is near constantly on the move in a metaphysical sense, Avalon has a connection to nearly all intersections of time and space. This is how, in a much more simplified sense, you are able to connect to Avalon through nearly any door if you have a key, and vice versa. The mechanics of how this works is, frankly, beyond my understanding at this time, but it will be something that we get into at the Magus and Masterclass level, Bernard said before clearing his throat. Today, however, we are going to focus on something much more straightforward. Something I suspect will be intuitive for you, given that you passed the test on your first try.
What is that? Abby asked as they came to a depression surrounded by the grassy hills, where a circle of stones sat. Each stone was about the size of her hand. and was stark white. As she got closer, she thought that they looked as though they had once been hewn into an even shape, but time had worn them down since then. Renard stepped into the middle of the ring of stones, eyes closed, and lowered his head. Then he took a deep breath, spread his arms out, and swept them forward. Something thrummed in her as she could feel as the wind was pulled to push as he had gestured. A gust blasted the side of the hill in front of him. He looked back to Abby with a satisfied smirk. Simple, applied, intuitive control is the technical term, but most people call it free-form casting. In short, basic control of an element. It is one of the earliest applied lessons students get to help them build an understanding of magic. Abigail smiled so wide her cheeks started to hurt. "How do I start?" she said, barely keeping herself from jumping with excitement. "Glad to see your enthusiasm," Renard said, laughing. "Let us briefly discuss what magic is first. Magic is both the force that creates our reality and is given shape by reality. It both creates and is created by its virtues. For example, fire is the source of passion, creativity, and pride. But the passion, creativity, and pride of people also creates fire and gives it form. To understand an element, you must understand the emotion or state of being that is associated with it. Someone who has never experienced anger, for example, will find it incredibly difficult to use metal magic, for it is difficult to understand that which one has not felt. Not impossible, mind you, just difficult. He stepped aside from where he stood in the ring of stones. "Come stand here in the circle. We'll discuss more after you've tried it yourself." Abigail stepped in the ring of stones and felt as though static electricity had built up all along her skin. "Wow." Renard raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" She suddenly realized she wasn't entirely sure how to describe what she felt out loud. Abby stammered, "There's this, energy? Like, ready, waiting, power." "Impressive." Renard smiled and shook his head. "I knew you would catch on quickly, but being able to feel the valence arcana in the circle without any training, that's not normal?" Abigail asked. Renard laughed. "Maybe for those with a wind affinity. There are so few examples it is hard to say, but Abby, the ability to understand what you are describing in such a way is something that even some senior scholars might only barely be able to grasp." "Oh." It was really the only thing she could think to say. Once again, something that seemed, well, almost natural to her, seemed to be some kind of exceptional feat. Abby really wasn't quite sure what to make of it all. "Well, this should make this lesson quite easy for you. You see, we bring initiates to circles like this because the valence arcana, or what is more commonly called ambient energy, is collected and focused by the stones. This makes it very easy to use magic, even for the untrained, since the wealth of compliant power so readily takes the shape that a user pushes upon it," Renard said, crossing his arms. "We can skip the lesson on starting to sense valence arcana since you already are able to. And we can move on to the fun part, casting." Abby grinned and rubbed her hands together. "What do I need to do?" "We'll start with your affinity first, since it is the easiest place to start." Renard gestured a deep breath with his hands. "First, breathe deep and try to clear your mind." She did so, though Abby always found the mind-clearing part hard to do.
Now, you will need to touch that ambient energy with your spirit. Invite it in. Open yourself to it.
This didn't exactly make sense to Abby. How did someone do, well, anything with their spirit? Yet, as she focused on the power that was building in the circle, she could feel there was something keeping that power from being hers. It was reaching out to her, but she hadn't accepted. Suddenly, as if drinking ice-cold water on a hot day, she felt the power wash into her. Renard smiled.
Now, just give it a push to change. Let your drive for change shape and mold that power, to give it a purpose. Then tell it where you would like it to go.
How exactly do I... Abby started.
Don't overthink it. Just do what feels right. Natural. Trust your instincts.
Renard stepped out of the ring at that point. A breeze caught his embroidered blue silk coat as he stepped out, making it billow in a somewhat dramatic fashion. Her attention went back to the expectant energy she held onto. He had said to give it a push. Abby extended her hand out in front of her and felt the energy somehow align to match it. The power was ready to do this. It needed somewhere to go, something to give it a new state of being.
You will be change,
Abby found herself saying as the energy spontaneously became a gust of wind that blasted from her hand and pushed the grass on the hill in front of her against the current breeze that coursed through the endless blades of emerald green. The sound of clapping brought her attention back to Renard.
Just as I thought. This is almost natural to you. It usually takes days of trial and error for new initiates.
He laughed, scratching his head.
It really is hard to believe that you haven't been researching and training for this your whole life. That wind blast, while small, was better than the trickle of current I was able to make my first time trying to use wind magic.
Abby smiled wide. I just did what you told me to.
Be that as it may, you're the one who accomplished the feat. I can teach and instruct all day long, but it is entirely incumbent on you to actually take those lessons to heart.
At this, Renard crossed his arms. Abigail shrugged. I suppose I see what you mean.
Renard smirked. I must admit, I am rather curious to see how you do with other elements.
He seemed to consider for a moment, scratching his chin.
Let's try water. It is a close cousin to wind, and should be easier for you to attempt than something contradictory like stone, or destructive like lightning.
I'm ready for anything, Abby said. Before she thought to draw in the ambient power of the circle, she realized that the energy was flooding into her, expectant, ready. Renard put his right hand over his heart.
This time I want you to take the power, in all of its raw, random chaos, and bring it to peace. Calm yourself and the power. Focus on the image of a still, cold pool. Serene, calm.
Abigail nodded her head and closed her eyes.
Peace. Bring the energy to peace. She kept trying to focus on the image of a still pool. But just as the image formed, it began to roil and churn. She kept trying to hold on to the idea of peace, but she couldn't calm herself down. She just wanted. Then everything changed. The energy became violent, ferocious, lashing out at her as an unworthy container. Abby yelped in pain and did the only thing she could think of,
willing the power to leave through her hand. Bolts of power sparked down her arm, and a blinding flash of pure energy shot from her into the hill, followed by a deafening boom. She fell to the ground, covering her ears with her hands, and shut her eyes against the terrible sound. As her ears recovered, she looked over to the hill, where an impact crater the size of her fist had formed. Much of the grass around the crater was on fire. Abby felt her heart drop. Suddenly, a sphere of water splashed over the crater and the burning grass. Abby looked over to see Reynard lower his right hand, a look of concern on his face. "Reynard, what was that? What did I do?" Abby asked, terrified. She walked over to him, feeling like a child who had broken a window or a priceless heirloom. He looked back to her, nodded, and spoke in a subdued, reserved tone. "That was lightning. A rather powerful bolt at that." "How did I do that? I was trying to focus on what you said. I just wanted to..." Reynard raised a hand. "That's just it. Peace is free of desire, for peace cannot exist when there is want. Or rather, metaphysically, peace is the abnegation of desire." Abby looked at her right arm, which tingled on the verge of numbness. Her coat and blouse had been ruined as the lightning had coursed through her arm. Holes were burned along the length of the right sleeve. Willow would be furious. She felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Bernard had walked over to her. "You're not hurt, are you? Lightning can be dangerous to the caster when they aren't prepared for it," Bernard said in a comforting tone. His eyes, somewhat on guard, obviously had a touch of concern. "My arm feels like it's on pins and needles, but otherwise I'm okay," she said, looking away as her cheeks started to redden. Somewhere between the intense focus on her and her spike of embarrassment over what had just happened, Abby felt it difficult to maintain eye contact. "Abby, it's all right. These things happen as you learn. I accidentally materialized and dropped a stone on Scholar Melania's foot one time as an initiate. I thought I'd never live that down," Bernard said with a chuckle. She met his eyes and laughed nervously. "This is all still very, very new to you, Abby. Mistakes and surprises are bound to happen. On the bright side, you seem to have an inclination towards one of the more difficult forms of magic to master. The sheer force and violence of the lightning makes it quite hard for most students to tap into. You have had a hard life, one where you have been in need and want of many things, but were denied them until now. Lightning is the spark and current of desire. It is the need to acquire, to break apart, to surge forward. It is change electrified into a direct, insatiable pursuit." He looked over her arm, pulling up the ruined sleeve to check for any injury that might have been hidden, she supposed. "I should have anticipated this and better prepared you. You seem so calm and unaffected by the trials you have had to go through in life that I didn't think to expect this." "So, how do I keep this from happening again?" Abby asked. Bernard smiled. "That will be easier to explain than it will be to do. Essentially, focus on the emotion or image that we discuss. Don't let doubt or frustration push you towards a want of success. That desire will contaminate whatever you are trying to focus on." She nodded. "I suppose that makes sense." Thankfully, the pins and needles feeling was starting to fade from her arm. For a moment, Abby had feared that she may have been stuck with a half-numb arm for the rest of her life.
The good news is that it should only be an issue in circles. Valence Arcana so readily takes any shape given to it. A single cohesive suggestion can polarize it in an instant. When you are channeling your own power, you will find that even with some contamination from other emotions pressing upon your thoughts, accidental casting is much more difficult. The level of control and effort you must exert in order to cast by yourself is just too great,
Renard said. A thought came to Abby. That's what the sphere is, isn't it? A ball of Valence Arcana? That's why it can reflect what you focus on, right? Renard grinned.
Quite astute. The sphere is similar to Valence Arcana. Notice that you didn't have to draw in its power in order to use it.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true, Abby said, nodding. Just when she thought she was starting to understand things a bit better.
It is something we haven't discussed yet. A different mode of Valence Arcana that we call Reflective Arcana. Instead of being ready to use, it shows what the user is feeling. We will actually use it later to help refine focus on the root emotions that are tied to each element,
Renard said before stepping out of the circle again.
Now, Abby, let's try water again. Remember, peace, a still pool of water, serenity, and perhaps even more helpful to you, the abnegation of want.
Abigail nodded
and closed her eyes, ready to try again.
She didn't care how many times it took. She would learn, and she would do better. Number 9. The Archives. Maya, could you put the returns away for level 6? Archivist Leilani said, scribbling away in her notebook, as always. Her chin-length, dirty blonde hair hid her face as she hunched over her work. A small library of books and scrolls lay on her desk, some open and resting on top of each other, others in a neat stack yet to be disturbed. Maya, who had been walking to her own desk after putting away the returns for level 75, bowed her head. Yes, Mom? She walked over to a row of book carts and found the one marked with the number 6 on the side. There were quite a lot of returns for 6. All 3 rows of the cart were full, and some books had even been further stacked on top. Perhaps one or more of the professors had assigned some kind of project in archaeology, judging from the titles on the spines. Level 6 was never this busy, unless there was some project or something along those lines. She started to push the cart towards the lift when she saw another heavily laden cart marked with the number 6. A strange day indeed. With both carts on the lift, she turned the brass knob from 99 to 6, and the machine lurched upward. Her heart briefly joined her stomach with the jolt. The operations elevator had become rather terrifying to use over the last few weeks. She kept forgetting to speak with Administrator Shran about having it serviced. Something had to be done about the shaking, ascending, and descending much too quickly, and that unnerving creaking sound that made the whole thing feel like it was about to fall apart. Trying to take her mind off the possibility of her impending doom at the hand of falling from a faulty elevator, Maya grabbed her thick glasses and wiped them with a cloth she kept in her pocket. It always seemed funny to her just how smudged her glasses got over the course of the day. The world around her was a blurry, confused mess as she cleaned them, and the growing anxiety in her made her realize that, perhaps, impairing her sight as she ascended on an, at least, questionable lift was rather unwise. Her hands shaking, she put her mostly smudge-free glasses back on. and her brown eyes adjusted again so she could see the hundreds upon thousands of bookshelves passing by her as she went up each level. She breathed a sigh of relief as the lift finally came to a stop at level 6, and she pulled the book carts along to the archaeology section. Maya came to a stop at the Roman-style archway tucked in between the winding, endless bookshelves that led to the section, and looked over the carts to see where to start. Archivist Leilani usually sorted books as they came in, but she had been so busy with her newest research project that she hadn't had the time to do anything but sort the books by what level they went to. Apparently there was a new student who had passed the Ambitus Arcane Reflexionis test on her first try, and Archivist Leilani was looking into what could be found on the student and related historical accounts for Headmistress Corvinus. So Maya looked over the titles and grouped the volumes by category. First Voyagers had quite a few, some 12th century. Interregnum Arcanum had even more than she'd have guessed for such an overlooked period of history. It took about half an hour with the sheer number of books to sort, but eventually she got them alphabetized by section and found a couple that actually belonged on level 5 with general history. An easy mistake to make though. She left one cart at the archway, so she did not have to drag both through the, at times, narrow walkways between bookshelves. The First Voyagers was a logical starting subsection since it was just to the right of the archway. Osiris the Builder, What They Left Behind, and so on went back to their rightful places, filling the gaps on the shelves that held nearly as many questions as they did answers. Maya soon fell into that familiar rhythm of returning books. Look at the title, look for its spot on the shelf, fit it back into place, and move on to the next. There was something so satisfying about taking a collection of misplaced volumes and returning them to their home. Sure, it was tedious, time-consuming, and took her away from things she'd rather be doing, but seeing the missing pieces return to where they belong just made her feel happy. She idly wondered if that was why she enjoyed puzzles so much. Before too long, with returning the Lost Pyramids of Avalon, Maya had gotten through the first cart and moved on to the other one. This started with prehistory and Jensen's Written in Stone. She came around the corner of Late Bronze Age to one of the reading and work areas, and saw a handsome young man, a third-year Stellarian cadet, and an attractive young woman who looked to be in the same class, sitting at one of the tables together. The woman, with a warm, contented smile, had her head resting on the man's shoulder as she read. From the quick glance that Maya stole, the man seemed to be having great difficulty actually focusing on the book he was reading. His eyes kept darting from his work to the woman's head, and he was practically sweating every ounce of moisture in his body. The poor man's face was even more red than his short hair. Maya smirked as she put away refugees of the collapse. She checked her pocket watch and decided she had more than enough time to take a break. So, Maya came back around to the other side of the bookshelf. Since there wasn't a full backing panel on the shelves, if she stood on the tips of her toes, she could see the couple at their table. Her hands resting on the shelf, Maya briefly found it interesting that the mahogany shelves here in the archaeology section matched her skin tone rather closely. Would this act as a kind of camouflage? After a moment's fancy, she shrugged and looked back through the shelves at the couple. By the 3, if the man blushed any deeper, he might just burst into flames. Maya couldn't decide if she wanted to see such a spectacle or not. For one, observing a case of legitimate spontaneous combustion would be fascinating. The screams of pain and terror would be a pretty significant negative, however. Not to mention the danger to the books around him. Maya noted that the woman seemed quite aware of her effect on the man. She caught her sneaking a peek at the man, and grinned mischievously. This young woman had the man exactly where she wanted him. Giggling as silently as she could manage, Maya withdrew her notebook from her beige assistant archivist coat and jotted down some notes about the scene for later. Maybe this situation she had stumbled into would be the exact thing she needed to breathe some life into that romance novel she had been working on in her spare time. Suddenly, the woman stood up and said something. Maya thought she heard something about a cafe, and then she was off, sparing the man one last wink and smile before she stepped out of the archaeology section. He looked to be collecting the books they had been reading. Maya stepped from around the corner and feigned surprise as best she could with her voice.
"Oh, hello there, young man. Done for the day?"
"Oh, yes, for now. We'll probably be back tomorrow," the man said, scratching the back of his head nervously. She held a hand out as he put the last book they had gathered on top of the stack.
"Will you be needing the same books again tomorrow then?"
I don't really know," he said as he picked up the stack, looking to the side as he thought.
"How about I put them on recall for you? That way you can easily collect them for tomorrow?"
Maya asked. A look of surprise hit the man.
"Oh, that's a great idea. I forgot archivists can do that."
He then handed the stack of 5 books over.
"That and more. What's your name, young man?"
"Oh, right,
Garrett Grant, 3rd year cadet of the Stellarians," he said.
Maya placed her left hand on top of the stack and closed her eyes. Her heart quaked as she reached unseen hands out to bind each book to him with a thread that would wear off after a couple days. Finally, she anchored the threads to the archive, its thrumming essence sending jolts of power through her. Then she said, "Recall set, Garrett Grant, Libri Quinque." Then she felt that familiar sensation of a connection becoming solid, like her ears popping after climbing a mountain. She smiled and placed the books on her cart.
"Just say recall Garrett Grant while holding this card."
At that, Maya extracted a slip of cardstock she had inscribed with a dormant activation circle. It was a quick cast card, which allowed the user to use a spell even if they were not trained in it.
"And they should materialize in front of you. I'd suggest placing the card on a desk or other flat surface after you say the words. Otherwise, they will form in your hand, which might be rather more weight than you will be ready for at once. I've made that mistake once. Ended up dropping the poor books on my feet."
Garrett smiled and took the card.
"Thank you. What was your name again?" "Maya Abebe, Assistant Archivist."
She held out her hand.
"Well met, Miss Abebe," he said, shaking her hand. "I've got to get going. Thank you for the help."
Maya watched as the young man walked to the lift and then went back to her work. About half an hour later, she had put the rest of the books back to their rightful place, including the ones that belonged on level 5, and she took the carts back to level 99. After she had put the carts back where she found them and removed their level markers, Maya walked back to her desk and found Archivist Leilani slumped in her chair, rubbing her eyes.
"Lonnie, how long has it been since you got some sleep?"
The woman chuckled, which turned into a yawn. She spoke in her signature sing-song, almost dream-like voice.
"Oh, probably the day before last. I think I found what I'm going to be able to find, though."
She yawned again, larger this time.
"Would you read over my notes, see if they're making any sense?"
"Of course, ma'am." She walked over to the archivist's desk and fished out Leilani's notebook. In her mentor's immaculate handwriting, she saw the name of the student she had been researching, Abigail Clarissa Scott, parents presumed dead, and then there seemed to be quite a few guesses at who her parents might be. "So we don't know," but she cut herself off when she realized that Leilani was already asleep. and likely would sleep as soundly as a rock for the rest of the day. She shook her head and smirked. Every time she got a research task from a professor or one of the headmasters, it was the same story. She'd pull as many all-nighters as necessary to work, and then crash once she had reached some kind of conclusion. Maya settled down at her desk and extracted her own notebook. Now it was time to find gaps, mistakes, and adjustments for her mentor, a task which Archivist Leilani said was essential for thorough research that is both accurate and insightful. Besides, Maya really wanted to learn more about this new student herself.
Number 10. To Unknown Shores. Osiris. It's just as you said. The fishermen spoke of an island out there which they have never seen before. The market was abuzz with the news when they came back with the day's catch, said Mazda, wiping his forehead as the heat of the day began to truly beat down from above. Right where you said they would see it, just past the cape. Osiris nodded and lowered his head in thought. His vision last night had been correct. Absurd as it was, islands didn't just appear. Yet, as the fisherman said, it seemed they did. At least this one, the one from his dreams. Something would be there. Something that would explain the reason for this entire journey, and his visions that had guided them. Answers about this power he had. How he could make the fires of his forge burn hotter. How the tools he made worked better and longer than that of others. How he always knew when it was going to rain. All of it. What does it mean, Osiris, this island, the appearance? Mazda asked. Looking up, Osiris saw a look of genuine concern. When Mazda's powers had started to form, his reaction had been one of fear, instead of the wonder Osiris had felt. Of course, Mazda had nearly burned down his workshop. The flames of his forge had burned hotter and brighter than either of them had ever seen. It means answers may be close at hand. Let us speak with the others to see what they think we should do, Osiris said, walking back to the camp. It was not long before he saw the circle of simple tents just outside of the small fishing village. Inanna smiled when she saw them return, her dark eyes practically sparkling. It was there, wasn't it? That's what the fishermen say, yes, Osiris said, coming to sit next to her. She kissed his cheek and hooked an arm around his as he settled. Surely we must go. We have traveled so far, she said, looking to Mazda, then over to Enki. Tiamat grumbled, shaking her head as her long, curly black hair undulated in the salty breeze from the sea. This is folly. We should not have come here, nor should we go to this place. I trust not these so-called visions of yours. Who is the greater fool? He who commits folly, or she who follows him through his folly, even though she doesn't believe him? Enki said, smirking with that relentless charm he was known for. Or the fool too foolish to think for himself, she snapped at him. Enki laughed. Tia, you wouldn't be here if you did not want answers. You were pulled here just like the rest of us. Enough. I've heard my fill of you two bickering. 3 months of this constant back and forth. Either lie with each other, or fight to the death, for the sake of the rest of us with ears. Baal said from his tent. They both looked to him in utter disgust. Marduk came to sit next to Osiris. So, this island, it's real. They really saw it. Yes, it is, Osiris said. Marduk nodded thoughtfully. Well, I say we should see this land. What say you, everyone? Amun nodded, as did Set and Mazda. Baal seemed reluctant but nodded his approval. Tiamat didn't meet Osiris's eyes, but didn't object. Enki happily raised a fist into the air. Kronos and Rhea bowed their heads. Odin rose and tapped his staff in the sand. The rest silently nodded their approval, one after another. Finally, Inanna smiled, saying, "We must go." Osiris grinned, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Then go, we shall." It was early afternoon before they had worked out a deal with a few fishermen to take them to the island they had seen. Osiris, Inanna, Enki, Marduk, Mazda, Odin, Kronos, Rhea, and Tiamat had chosen to be the first to come. There was only so much room on the boats, so it had been decided that a few of the group would go first, and the rest would come once the first had returned with news of what they had seen. A green mass loomed on the horizon as they came around the cape. He could even see the hazy silhouette of a mountain in the distance. He knew immediately that this was the land he had seen in his vision. The sensation of seeing it in front of him sent a chill down his spine. They made it to the fine sandy shore as the sun began to hang low in the sky. The fishermen had to head back to rest so that they could wake in time to fish the next morning, but promised to return after the fishing was done for the day. Something told Osiris that they wouldn't need to do so. He dug a hand into the beach sand, pulling up a handful of the soft, amber-colored earth. It felt and looked nothing like the sand of the fishing village, nor that of his home. The taste of salt on the air from the sea felt somehow sweeter here, and less harsh upon the nose. A cool, refreshing breeze blew across the beach. It was such a stark contrast to the blazing summer heat that had beat down from above earlier in the day. He couldn't make out the edges of the island from where he sat. The island had to be quite large indeed. Impossible for the fishermen to have missed every day of their lives. "It's more beautiful than I could have ever imagined," Osiris heard Inanna say. He looked to her slender figure standing on a small dune just past the back shore. "What do you see?" Enki asked, walking through the beach sand awkwardly. She looked back to him, then to Osiris, smiling with a warmth he had only seen twice before. "Paradise." Enki finally made it to where she stood. He looked back as well, an expression of utter shock on his face. Osiris stood and made his way up to them. The others followed shortly behind. He almost lost his footing in the fine, almost powdery sand, but eventually he came to the top of the dune and saw exactly what they had. Tears began to well in his eyes from the sheer majesty of the sight. A seemingly endless expanse of rolling grassy hills lay just past the dunes. Wind coursed through the innumerable blades, making the hills seem alive with breath. Something even darker green lay further in the horizon, but he couldn't make it out. Even the mountain he had spied from the boats he could see now was wreathed in green. He had never seen such a hue in his life, nor so much of it. It was just as Inanna had said, paradise. Something called them forward, so they strode through the grass for a while. The blades of grass reached all the way to Osiris's hips. They were soft, almost like fine fabric, caressing them as they continued onward. Tiamat came next to Osiris, the same sense of wonder he felt clearly painted on her dusky features. "Be this what you saw in your vision?" "No," he said simply.
Her eyes snapped back to him, puzzled. He smiled and laughed.
What I saw was nowhere near this beautiful. I don't know if I'd have believed it possible, even if I had seen it in the vision. It would have been too unbelievable.
Soon they saw something he had only heard outlandish tales about. A forest of trees. Not like the date palms or bushy tamarisk he knew well. These were tall, leafy, with bark the likes he barely knew how to describe. They didn't even look like the cedar trees he had seen brought in from lands far away. There were so many trees. Too many to count. He placed a hand on the trunk of one of them, amazed at the spectacle. So scarce were good trees for building that this amounted to no small fortune. And the smell. So fresh. So full of life. They took a moment to take some fallen branches to use as torches in the failing light, so that they could still see after the sun had set. Eventually they came to an opening in the ground. It was a cave carved into the side of one of the hills. They couldn't fully make it out in the gloom of the night, even with the torches, and the sliver of moonlight from the waning crescent above. This was important, beyond important. He had seen this cave. It was in the first vision he had years ago. He had just forgotten until now. Osiris's hands shook at the realization. It was all coming into focus.
Should we make camp? It is getting quite dark, Marduk said, lowering his pack.
Osiris just stared at the cave mouth for a moment. Then he started walking towards it.
We have to go inside.
Osiris, maybe we should wait until morning? Mazda suggested. Concern colored his eyes again.
No, this is where the answers are. I know of this place,
Osiris said, looking back to Mazda. Inanna placed a warm hand on his shoulder. How about we split up? Some of us will go, some of us will stay and make camp.
I am going. I don't like the idea of waiting,
Tiamat said, crossing her strong arms over her chest.
You went from skeptic to believer pretty quickly, didn't you?
Enki said, chuckling. Tiamat rolled her eyes and made a vulgar gesture.
"'Twould be a fool not to believe what I see with my very own eyes."
Enki just shook his head, laughing.
"I'll make camp. Get something together to eat."
"I should like to go. Something is pulling me towards that cave. I'll not ignore it,"
Odin said, resting more weight on his staff. He was older than the rest of them, and this trek through the grassy hills had obviously been hard on him.
"Are you sure?
Perhaps you should rest," Osiris said. Odin's face became not unlike that of a storm cloud.
"I said I'm going."
Osiris nodded, understanding that pressing any further would be pointless. Mazda shrugged.
"I shall make camp with Enki. Besides, he always manages to undercook the food."
"Now, that's just personal taste, Mazda," Enki said. Marduk was already pulling things from his pack.
"Someone needs to keep an eye on these two."
Kronos sighed.
"I think Rhea and I will stay. She needs rest."
Rhea smiled. Heavy with child, her belly had started to swell in the past 2 weeks. They were expecting their first child after meeting for the first time at the start of the journey. He had tried to talk Rhea out of coming to the island given her condition, and the fact that they really didn't know what to expect, but she had insisted that she had to come. Then it came to Inanna, but Osiris already knew what she would say. She simply smiled, took his hand, and pulled him towards the cave. He wasn't sure what they would find within, but Osiris knew it would change everything. The visions, their powers,
this whole journey would finally make sense. There was nothing in the world that could stop him from getting those answers.